Hey, Billy, why don't we tell them what we're about, man?
So we're here to welcome you to the Madhouse Chronicles. It's a talk show with myself, Billy Morrison.
And me, Ozzy Osbourne.
This man, Prince of Darkness. And we watch and react to the maddest internet clips. What do we discuss, Ozzy?
Drugs, rock and roll, aliens, all that kind of shit.
Drugs, rock and roll, aliens, and all that kinds of shit. Come and join Ozzy and myself. Visit osbornemediahouse.com to get special access to...
Come on!
What do you say? Do you think it's the wildest show on the internet?
Oh.
This podcast is brought to you by patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. Head there to check out exclusive podcasts like Talking Futurama, Talk King of the Hill, the What a Cartoon Movie podcast, and tons more.
Cartoons from present in the past. Every week will be an animated bash. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! Maybe a short but mostly shows. We'll talk, we'll analyze, exploring as we go. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon!
Hello everybody and welcome to What a Cartoon, recorded live within a crypt in Skellweb. I'm one of your hosts, the surface-delling flesh slug Bob Mackey, and this is an audio exploration of every cartoon ever. Who is here with me today, as always?
Capitulating Granite Man, Henry Gilbert.
And who is our special guest who is sponsoring this episode?
Andrew Bouvier, and after this podcast recording, I'm going to toot root out of here.
And this month's podcast is all about the Inhumanoids episode, The Evil That Lies Within, Part 3.
Rock creatures known as the Granites. But the Inhumanoids aren't their only problem.
Yes, and this is another patron pick from Andrew Bouvier, who last joined us a few months ago for the Invincible podcast we put together.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, guys.
Invincible Inhumanoids. I sense a pattern here.
Uh-oh. I got to find another third cartoon that begins with IN.
The Incredible Mr. Limpet. For What a Cartoon Movie. We're not doing that, by the way. Not enough cartoon content. If only they had made that Jim Carrey CGI version in the 90s.
If only. But yes, Andrew, why did you choose to take us back to the toy commercial mid-'80s that we've covered a few times before?
Yeah, so this is a show that I sort of half remembered as a kid. You know, I either must have saw bits and pieces either when it was on TV or maybe a friend of mine had a videotape of it that they put out. And then it was one of those cartoons where I'm like, did I remember that cartoon? Did I make it up? And I couldn't remember the name of it was the problem. So even in I got to college and file sharing, was getting big, and I would try and find it. I'm like, oh, was it Centurions? Was it Exo Squad? Was it Mask? Was it just a weird episode of G.I. Joe that had giant monsters I'm misremembering? And I couldn't find it for the life of me until just a few years ago. I think something popped up in my YouTube recommends because I was watching other, YouTube, retrospectives and histories of 80s cartoons about the Inhumanoids. And I'm like, that was the show that I couldn't remember. So many of those other 80s toyetic shows where it's just, they all look so similar. They share half the voice cast, even, some writers and animators, directors, everything. So it's...
Oh, yeah.
We'll get into that, but yeah, wow.
It's so from the same factory as G.I. Joe and Transformers that it's easy to get mixed up. Also, I did not watch this back in the 80s either as a kid. It was not in my market, and the VHS tape never called to me like, say, a Transformers or G.I. Joe tape did when mommy took me to the video store. But when I see it now, I'm like, oh, yeah, this was made for me. But I think I got it mixed up as well with Visionaries, because I did have a couple toys of the Visionaries, which are the guys with the hologram chest thingies.
God, I have not heard of those either.
Another one I half remember. Because they're just all so similar.
For me, this is totally new to me. I have vague memories of seeing toys of these in some abandoned sandbox somewhere because Henry and I born in 82. By the time I'm, being socialized, playing with other kids, the Inhumanoids are in the past and these toys are being discarded. So I have a foggy memories of maybe some discarded Metlar hanging out in a sandbox somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than that, I've never seen this in my life. And you mentioned Exo Squad in your intro, Andrew, talking about things you had seen that are similar to this. Exo Squad from the 90s is a much better version of this, and I did like Exo Squad a lot when I was a tween. This, though, I feel like if I had seen it as a kid, I would have really liked it because I didn't like robot things, I didn't like car things, and I didn't like dinosaurs, but I loved monsters, which is why the real Ghostbusters was the one toyetic toy commercial cartoon that I did watch because of all the cool, creepy monsters and all of the fun ideas. And this has a lot of disgusting monsters who are always screaming and some extremely morbid content. I think I really would have liked this as a 4-year-old if I had been sat down in front of it irresponsibly.
You know, I didn't write down Ghostbusters in my whole notes, but when you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like 4 scientists with super machines arguing with each other all the time. It's just not as funny as Ghostbusters.
And a bunch of monsters screaming, decompose, decompose.
The screaming. Yeah. Well, and also thanks to market forces I learned about in my note-taking in history, the Inhumanoids, unlike most things from the 80s, has a real legal uphill battle to get to exist and be profitable for Hasbro in a nostalgic sense. Yeah, I think it came, when I look at it as a 1986 toy line / toy commercial and cartoon show, I see it as they were just 2 years too early on the gross toy world of the TMNT. The Ninja Turtles had all these gross toys, but their tone, I think, worked a lot better. And also, honestly, when I looked up pictures of these original toys and had the same kind of memory of oh yeah, some kid at a playground brought one of these there. When I looked at them, like these toys suck. I think they are crappy. The toys themselves are crappy compared to their contemporaries back then.
No, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned TMNT, Henry. I love that series because of all the cool monsters. And I know you're going to get into this, but when I looked at the series, how long it ran, before I naturally assumed, 52, 65? No, it's just a slim 13. And that really surprised me.
Yeah, no, Hasbro hit it and quit it pretty fast that's a gross thing to say. But they left Inhumanoids behind very quickly. It was the go-go 80s. It was Reagan's America, and this is extremely a show about Reagan's America. But
I got some notes about that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this show is mostly about airing Vietnam War grievances.
Yes. Now, there's some fun stuff in other episodes. Part 2 especially has more social commentary than I expected, though this is the most political of the 5-parter. Though I forgot that the series, I never knew this until I watched a retrospective just on the whole series. The last episode is Augur, the bald guy of the group, runs for president and wins. He is president.
He is the Trump figure of the entire crew.
Yeah, he never wants to be anywhere, and he's always trying to make excuses like, well, I'm out of here. You guys deal with this.
When I think of this thing, you compare it to G.I. Joe. You've got 2 cool armies of guys with lots of special, unique powers fighting each other and shooting lasers all the time. Then with Transformers, you've got 2 groups of equal giant robots fighting each other, and they all look cool and have a cool gimmick to them. Here, you got 4 scientists who can't do shit to giant monsters, and who's helping them? Rocks and trees. That's who's helping them.
The series invented Gorons.
They straight up stole the Ents from Tolkien too. If somebody was stupid and didn't know books came before the Lord of the Rings movies, they might think, oh, Peter Jackson ripped off the scenes of the Ents being argued with to get into action for those movies, when it's no, that was in the Lord of the Rings books 40 years before this TV show aired. Well, why don't we get into the history of the Inhumanoids? Not to be confused with Jack Kirby's The Inhumans from Marvel Comics, of course.
Hey, was that a series recently or a movie or something? Did they
Oh,
do
Bob,
something
you're
with
asking
that?
a big question
Oh, no.
here.
We're adding 20 minutes to this podcast. I need a 15-second answer.
It was a TV series. They thought they'd make it into a movie because Ike Perlmutter, the evil guy, the more evil guy who owns Marvel, really wanted it instead of X-Men. And then when Kevin Feige got full control over Marvel, he said, we're not doing stupid Inhumans, we're doing the X-Men. So That's the short version.
I really think I might have read ad copy for this at our old job. It might have been the Inhumans.
There was an Inhumans TV show that was not very good.
By all accounts, it was terrible. And I've seen clips of the special effects. Again, I'm not blaming the people who work on the effects. They did the best they could, but they were obviously under a time and money crunch to just get it done quickly and cheaply. So, and it shows.
And also, it's insane. Monday morning quarterbacking that. Why do you make an Inhumans TV show and an Eternals movie? The Inhumans are the better version of the Eternals. The Eternals are boring. Even Jack Kirby knew that they weren't as cool as the Inhumans.
Ultimately, what we're saying is Inhumans, not the Inhumanoids.
Yes.
Not as good.
Yeah. So, yes, this history I looked up, there is one main guy who is the source on these things because he's the main person who does interviews and talks about Inhumanoids, because most people who worked on Inhumanoids don't care to talk about it. Well, and even this guy just gives a lot of interviews all the time, because especially to Transformers wikis, and that is Flint Dilley, the head writer and main writer of every episode. He's either the only credited writer or the co-writer of every episode of Inhumanoids. So he is the main source. I even downloaded on Kindle his book and read his Inhumanoid chapters in it. It's a fine little memoir, though I will say a couple things when I line them up with other interviews. I'm like, well, one of these is not correct. There's discrepancies, let's say.
Large portions are excerpts from the Oliver North trial.
I think in Flint Dilley's book, it would be about how Oliver North was a cool guy. But
Now, Flint Dilley, real name?
yes, actually, it's an old money name, even, Flint Dilley, because he comes from the Buck Rogers family. His grandfather created the comic strip Buck Rogers, and that was making his family very wealthy. So he is the grandson of the creator of Buck Rogers, and that opened a whole lot of doors for old Flint Dilley in his career, which he both admits to in his book and also is a bit sensitive about. He's like, okay, so I'm a trust fund kid, sure, but you know what? George Lucas didn't care about that. This is going to sound like I'm savaging Flint Dilley. I like his book wasn't bad, and he is good at interviews, but
I feel like they were trying to sell Buck Rogers to us again as kids in the 80s, and it just didn't take. And then I had a lot more fun watching the Mystery Science Theater riff, the Commando Cody stuff, the stuff that's very similar to Buck Rogers.
Flint Dilley is the main source. I will say, if you're especially a big-time Transformers and Transformers the movie fan like me, his book does have a lot of fun stories in it about working on that. His stories about working with the voice actors, working with Orson Welles. Also, if you're a hardcore Marvel comic nerd like me, you get to hear him tell fun stories about working with Steve Gerber and Jack Kirby and Frank Miller. And so if you're interested in those kind of stories about the 80s, he's got a lot of fun stories. So, and George Lucas and also Paul Dini. So he's got fun stories. I don't want to discourage people from reading his book. I do think it's good or worth a read. The name of the book, too, is The Game Master, My Life in 80s Geek Culture. Oh, also, too, he was friends with Gary Gygax in the 80s as well, and he worked on a lot of video games early in the days of video games bothering to hire writers. So,
Oh, really? Wow.
So he's led an interesting life. But so, yes, I'm not going to go into the whole Sunbow Marvel Productions Hasbro history, because we've done that a lot in Transformers and our Transformers movie and the G.I. Joe podcast. But the short version is, after He-Man hit it big, thanks to Ronald Reagan's deregulation of being allowed to put toy commercials on TV and call it TV shows, then Hasbro got together with the marketing company Sunbow, who then hired the animation studio Marvel Productions, who would then outsource it to Toei Animation, and they started doing a relaunch of the G.I. Joe toy line as a TV show. That did so well in 83. In 84, they launched Transformers. Does even better. They are doing really great, and the pipeline to Toei to animate the stuff, who Toei also sometimes secretly outsources it either to B studios in Japan or in Korea. It's working out pretty great for them, to huge profits at the toy aisle for Hasbro, almost as close as they are to Mattel with their He-Man and Barbie stuff. And so by 1985, Hasbro is investing big time in a G.I. Joe movie and a Transformers movie. We talked all about that. And the main point of both of those things is to reset both toy lines and make kids buy new toys of new characters. Even though they got those two hits, they do want to work on kind of a pilot program for new toys. So how do they do that? Well, they create a new 15-episode weekend syndicated cartoon series that's an anthology called Super Sunday, or Super Saturday, if that's what channel your syndicated network put it on there in America. So it basically works as 3 cartoons, 7 minutes each. So each act is a segment of a cartoon that will always end in a cliffhanger. And they're very smart because, okay, these will make 15 each of 3 different shows. Then those together can become 5 TV show episodes if we choose to. And we can sell them as VHSs as a movie otherwise. And they were working with Family Home Entertainment, which we were just talking about in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990.
One of the worst logos to ever do it.
Yes. FHE with TMNT 90, they were very ahead of the curve of selling VHSs to kids in the US, but that also is why they were so lucky to get the Ninja Turtles movie, which nobody thought would be that big of a deal. And it turns into like one of the highest selling VHSs. I would bet it's the highest selling VHS FHE ever had.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
It's got to be.
So on Super Sunday, the plan is for 3 shows, one of which already has its own toys, which is Robotics, which was like Milton Bradley erector set type deals, but that were like, oh, but it's a dinosaur now instead of like a shovel. Like that's basically Robotics. Then Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines, which was like, what if Bigfoot, the monster truck, went on Transformers style adventures? That's Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines.
The crime-solving monster truck.
Yes.
And then Bigfoot would be part of that Video Power show, the first iteration, when it was a collection of Acclaim published characters.
That's right.
Characters
yeah.
from Acclaim published video games. It was like Bigfoot, the arch rivals, Quirk, a few
Right.
other guys.
That's
thrown in
right. Oh, man. All the best. That's right. God. And that was, talk about a different type of scam than Sunbow was running, that they only did 15 minutes of animation, and then the third segment was like a guy reviewing Acclaim games.
Mm-hmm.
What a scam. But okay, so Robotics and Bigfoot. And the third one was Hasbro's attempt to break into the Barbie market, Gem and the Holograms. Of course, you know, it's an entire podcast of its own, but Gem and the Holograms, that was the big hit. And it quickly spun out into its own series. And a funny thing with Gem and the Holograms, too, is that it has its own segment in that if you watch the Toys That Made Us and watch the Barbie one, they have an entire segment about how Mattel learned about Gem thanks to like corporate spying, honestly. And they're like, shit, we got to get an MTV Barbie out now to beat Gem to the market, or else Gem might actually hurt us this holiday season. And they pulled it off. It's doing so well that by the summer of 1986, which is also when the Transformers movie is going to release in theaters, they are needing a new concept because Gem is going to not be in Super Saturdays over the summer. And they're going to use it as a launching ground for a new third segment to go with Robotics and Bigfoot. And so at this time, it's really hard to say when Inhumanoids was baked in the Hasbro lab, but it's very likely that Hasbro decided, similar to Transformers and G.I. Joe, Hasbro decided they'd have a toy line, they brainstorm a core idea of it, and then they give it to Sunbow and Marvel to actually make a whole story with it. Though it's interesting to say the time frame, if you think of 1984, when it might have been first bubbling up, you've got He-Man with its kind of goopy, skeleton-y style. And in fact, they're selling the, like, you know, Castle Grayskull. Basically, the idea of the big Inhumanoids are, what if Castle Grayskull or other giant playsets, what if they could walk around? What if they were also an action figure? That's the core of Inhumanoids. They'll also consider big movie that year, Gremlins, and you got Michael Jackson's Thriller. So, you know, monster-y elements are pretty hot in 1984. And the earliest documentation I could find of an Inhumanoids pitch is from January 1985, which is conceived, it's like a 10-page pitch by Marvel Comics writer Tom DeFalco, who was writing Amazing Spider-Man at the time. So I know all about Tom DeFalco, but short version is he was hired, much like Larry Hama, another Marvel Comics writer, did with G.I. Joe. They're like, okay, what would your pitch be for like a monster thing? And like, what if like 4 scientists fought a monster? And so his pitch was The Force of Light. It was the name of it. And it was basically the Mutors were the monsters in it. They didn't have the name Inhumanoids for it yet. He came up with the idea of Mutors, which like meteorites hit the earth. And when the meteorites hit the earth, then deep dwelling monsters come out of it. And 4 scientists who are basically the Challengers of the Unknown. Like, I know Tom DeFalco, and I know he knows to rip off Challengers of the Unknown. Those guys argue with each other, and in it too, they still have like, oh yeah, and one of their best friends is Redwood, and it's a tree, and I'm just like, even from the beginning, it's like, trees suck. Kids don't want to play with trees.
Hey, trees, I think you have to be an adult to appreciate trees, to be fair. Kids, they just want to carve their initials in them, climb them, fall out of them, break their legs.
They don't want to have them be like, help somebody, or like, they don't want to be like, I am Redwood. I just think of that scene from Big, where Tom Hanks is playtesting the toys, and he's like, what kid wants to play with a building? I was thinking the same deal for this.
Yeah, exactly what I thought of.
But Hasbro must have liked that pitch on some level, but didn't fully go with it, though. The character archetypes of the four main scientists are basically there. The monster styles are there. So they keep working on it for a time, and they slowly figure out, you know, they want big moving creatures. Then they want basically guys who are G.I. Joes that wear Transformers. That's what the heroes are. And also their own vehicles. And so they've got this whole line together. And this is where Flint Dille comes in. Now, Flint Dille, grandson of the creator of Buck Rogers, a UC Berkeley alum who even put in another episode of Inhumanoids I watched, he put in a Berkeley address that is a real address that's like a block from the Safeway on College Drive that I walked by hundreds of times. He put that in an episode, and I was like, what the hell?
So he was doxing someone.
He was doxing his old girlfriend. Yes. But he's trying to basically, after Berkeley, he goes to USC and he's trying to break into writing. He wants to be a screenwriter. And, you know, he is using the Buck Rogers connection to get him indoors. Like, basically, you can get a meeting with, I have access to the Buck Rogers rights and I have a pitch for a Buck Rogers movie. That gets you meetings and it opens doors.
In the early 80s, to be fair. I think you would be thrown out on your ear if you approach David Zaslav with your Buck Rogers reboot idea.
Yeah, I feel like even 1983, you're pushing it on Buck Rogers knowledge, I think. Though that was what got him into the world of video games kind of early, because they did, like, I think it was a Commodore game was a Buck Rogers game. So he was playing video games before a lot of other adult men were in Hollywood. By the way, he will go on to be a video game writer up until, like, he wrote that Butcher Bay video game for the Vin Diesel Pitch Black video game series. Everybody liked.
You know, I was thinking about Buck Rogers, and I honestly think Flash Gordon, his contemporary, ended up being the more popular figure, mostly because of Ted, the movie Ted and Ted 2, increasing Flash Gordon awareness.
I mean, Buck Rogers, he should have hired Queen to write a song for him, too. The Buck Rogers estate. Yeah. So yeah, Flint Dille, he's in his mid-20s. You know, having the Buck Rogers estate backing you up means you can work a lot of dumb jobs in Hollywood for like 7 years until you finally get a meeting at a cartoon job. That was pretty useful for old Flint Dille. So he gets a meeting at Ruby Spears, partially to pitch a Buck Rogers cartoon. Joe Ruby doesn't want the cartoon, or he's like, maybe. But he does see that Dille has some skill. He sees some skill in him, and he's like, okay, you know what? You could be one of our starting writers. Like, you start here for a few weeks, work under Steve Gerber and a few other guys, and learn the ropes, kid. And Joe Ruby seemed to think that he ended up doing pretty good. He wrote for some Ruby Spears shows that are absolute crap, like The Puppy Adventures Continue, which I have never heard of before, ever.
I didn't know the Puppy Adventures stopped at some point.
And also he wrote for the Mr. T one that is only remembered to us because Saturday TV Funhouse mocked it mercilessly. But while there, that's when he worked with Jack Kirby and Steve Gerber and met a young writer named Paul Dini. But he must have been all right at his job and dependable, because by spring of '84, he's doing so well that when George Lucas is looking to do his own hour of Saturday morning programming, he headhunts several of the top writers at Ruby Spears and hires them for his shows, which would be Droids and Ewoks. Droids would be the boy show, Ewoks would be the girl show, and Ewoks would be run by Paul Dini, Droids would be run by Flint Dille.
And we are recording this on May 4th. So very appropriate. You know, and previously I was asking, did fans come up with May 4th, or did Lucas come up with May 4th, the Lucasfilm organization? Now I think it's a plot by corporate America to have us all forget about the Kent State Massacre.
I didn't know what day it was. Right now, when we're recording this, is a good time to remember that, too.
Very
isn't it?
appropriate.
Yeah. I went to Kent State for graduate school. They take it very seriously, by the way.
Wow, man. I'm wearing a droid shirt today because I pulled it out of my closet because I was like, oh, well, Flint Dille worked on this, so it's fitting for the histories. And he has fun stories about working with George Lucas right at the time, working on this while also working on Temple of Doom. And Dille hoped to be in the Lucas system for a long time, but George is an ephemeral guy is pretty much what it sounded like. And then just after one season of Droids and Ewoks, he went to a new thing.
Well, this is divorce town for Mr. George Lucas, right? These are some sad years for him. He's getting divorced. He's working on this thing called Willow. It's not great.
Ugh. And then Howard the Duck after that.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's why they say that Temple of Doom is such a mean, cruel movie, is because like Spielberg and Lucas were both going through a divorce at the same time. And also around that same time, Flint Dille befriended Gary Gygax, though it helped that Flint Dille's sister was part owner of TSR at the time. But, yeah. Dille then, instead of going back to Ruby Spears after Droids was over, he went over to Sunbow, which was really ramping up production for Transformers. And Dille did have an interesting thing to say about Sunbow. He said it was one of his favorite to work for because, unlike its competitors, they were the most prompt with paying their writers. He said, you get an assignment, the check is in FedEx immediately. You are not chasing your paychecks, which was nice to hear about Sunbow.
That sounds like a rarity.
Compared to Deke, which sounded like it was the opposite from every story I've read about it.
So Flint Dille, did he name the character G.I. Joe Flint after himself, or is that just a coincidence?
It is what
That
he
Flint character was
says
already
in
there.
his book. I will say that.
Because it sounds like he came in after the initial stuff for G.I. Joe has already been done, so that character theoretically was already existing.
Well, though, I believe Flint was like a second wave guy.
Yeah, because at the beginning, Duke was the guy who was like, he's the main guy. And then, I think Flint was. I don't know if he was after the movie or what, but...
Now,
So maybe it was...
I'm not the biggest Joe historian, but I think in the book he does imply that Flint was partially named after him.
Okay. So he didn't name it himself, but maybe other people involved were like, oh, Flint's got a fun name. That's a great soldier name, Flint.
Yeah,
Tough.
because he was more... Flint Dille was more of a... And I'm going to say a little of this in a sec, but yeah, he was full-time on Transformers and helping on G.I. Joe. So,
Okay.
yeah, he was more of a Transformers guy than a Joe guy.
Yeah, that could also describe me as a kid.
No, me too. Me too. Oh, and yeah, I also had to look up several video interviews with him just to find somebody saying his name clearly. So I was like, because it's Dille, and I was like, okay, is it Dille? And it is Dille, like a dilly bar.
Okay.
I would wonder if, and I'm going to take this moment here. Is Buck Rogers public domain now?
I don't think I've ever seen a single Buck Rogers anything. I've only ever seen also-rans like Flash. I've seen occasional Flash Gordon things, mostly just that late 70s or early 80s, movie. And then obviously I mostly know Buck Rogers from Duck Dodgers.
Yes.
I think for most of us of our age and even maybe a little younger, a little older, Gen Xers even, we just know the name from the Daffy Duck parodies because he had his own show in the late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah,
right?
which Paul Dini worked
The
on.
specific.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, no, the Duck Dodgers thing. Well, also, I would always hear that, like, what inspired Star Wars was the Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon that George Lucas grew up on. But I think it's more Flash Gordon than Buck Rogers. But, yeah. So when Flint Dille was working at Sunbow, he was mainly in Transformers. He wrote a ton of season 2. As I mentioned on our Transformers the Movie podcast, he did a uncredited major rewrite of that. Most of the lines in the movie he takes some credit for, and also say the circumstances of Optimus Prime's death. In his book, opening story, he starts with, because it's his best story, I think, which is about how Frank Miller became his friend the day he was writing the death scene of Optimus Prime, and Frank Miller kind of helped him with it. He was friends with Frank Miller for a long time, apparently, I think still. And like Frank Miller, back when it seemed like Frank Miller might actually get to direct another movie after The Spirit, the next thing he wanted to do was a Buck Rogers movie with Flint Dille. Yes.
I was going to say, don't do that, but it's not going to happen.
No. Frank Miller blew it so hard with The Spirit, and I do think Frank Miller I am not defending anything he's done in the last 23 years. I think Frank Miller, learned what a huge asshole he became and is trying to at least get back some esteem, but
yeah,
good luck with that.
He's coming back from the edge a little bit. Like a lot of people, 9/11 ruined his brain.
Yes, yeah. And I think Trump made him go, oh, shit, am I this bad? And yes, you were that bad, Frank, but good luck coming back. Also, he apparently himself went through like a bad divorce and drinky motion, I think, that he's been dealing with, but I hope he's in a better place. But anyway, so Flint Dille, he's also working a lot with Buzz Dixon, who's the other major writer on Inhumanoids in the future. And Buzz Dixon I did want to bring up too, because he is the co-creator, or basically the creator of the character Hector Ramirez in the Sunbow universe, which if you don't know him, I just learned about him. He is the connective tissue of the Hasbro cinematic universe, because he appears in Inhumanoids, Transformers, he debuted in G.I. Joe, and he's in Jam. He's the one guy that straddles all of them. And
Weird.
He's a Geraldo Rivera parody.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Hector Ramirez is Geraldo Rivera. So he's working on these multiple shows, mainly Transformers, and that's when Sunbow taps him for a project in summer of 1985. Now, as Dille recalls it, it was Sunbow boss Tom Griffin who was working on the big picture idea for what it would be, including the naming of Inhumanoids. He likened it to Journey to the Center of the Earth meets Godzilla, pretty much. Again, more ancient, something even older than Buck Rogers, which I just looked up. Buck Rogers goes in the public domain in 2030.
I'm writing my spec script as we speak.
Yeah, I was going to say that's when I'm making my Buck Rogers movie.
That's what Dille really latched onto, though he also, big thing for him, Dille, when writing it was, he says he's a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft and that kind of like ancient horror style, but also the 70s political dramas like The Parallax View and All the President's Men. Like, he was also trying to tap into that in this toy commercial. But the idea was that underground drilling for oil and excavation for, treasure would find these ancient beasts. You'd have Metlar, the big boss with lava inside, decompose, D''compose or D-compose. I've seen it both ways.
He's French.
and he
decompose.
And he's a huge zombie with visible guts, and Tendril, a growing plant monster that was the most Lovecraftian of the ones. And they'd fight the Earth Core, which, get it? Earth, C-O-R-P-S, core, but the Earth Core to C-O-R-E.
Now I get it. I didn't get it until you said that. I don't think I said it out loud.
Me either. I only was thinking of like Army Corps. Yeah.
Though also Dille did want to put in some social commentary, not just with the Senate arguments that happened in this episode too, but also one thing he noted was G.I. Joe never has to really work with politicians. They're just, G.I. Joe has funding all the time. But Earth Corps, in the first episode, thanks to a Ted Kennedy stand-in senator being bribed by an evil oil baron, their budget is cut, and it's up to a rich philanthropist, a.k.a. privatization, to keep the Earth Corps going.
This is Reagan's America, everybody.
It's so fun. I mean, too, again, when I talk about Flint Dille's seeming politics on display, I saw the senator being bribed in these episodes. I was like, well, that could be any party senator. But then he in his book says, yeah, Ted Kennedy standing. I was like, all right, gotcha. I mean, Ted Kennedy sucks. I'm not saying he doesn't suck.
Yeah.
But so Dille is working on that outline for 5 episodes. It's just going to be 5 episodes worth of things that will also be a movie and segments on Super Sunday. Finishes it. He says he wrote all 5 episodes in scripts in a hurried week at the start of November, which you wouldn't know it to watch the show.
No, it's airtight. This plotting.
And Dille also mentioned that with this horror concept, though, he actually was really excited to push the envelope a little bit more content-wise. Now, obviously, this is not like an R-rated cartoon show. This is still like a toy commercial for kids. But if you compare it even to, G.I. Joe and Transformers or He-Man, this has a lot more like death, or at least near death, and the zombies. And also note that there's no Snarf type figure in this show.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Henry. There's no little blobular thing where they can go, oh, Sloopo, you've done it again.
Yeah. They don't give a little Earth Core suit to a 10-year-old boy who accompanies them on the adventures.
It's really interesting. I mean, I could see this never came up in interviews of why that typical thing isn't there. But G.I. Joe and Transformers didn't really put in kids too much either, or they really were their own teams. But this did it even more. Like, say in G.I. Joe, like Shipwreck does have Polly, who like you could call that parrot like sort of a fun animal mascot, but he's not like Orko or Snarf. Sorry, Bob. But so, yes, he bangs out the script, and he did say it was a bit of a pain to basically write all 3 acts of a thing to work as an episode that can also be their own episode that have their own cliffhanger for each week on a serialized show, but also works as a movie that you'd watch on VHS cut together. It sounded a little annoying.
Mm-hmm.
They had the usual group of storyboarders banging it out. I found a few on a Transformers archive. Thank you to all of the hardcore Transformer nerds who view Inhumanoids as part of the history to maintain and have found several of the old storyboards and have scanned and archived them. So thank you, TF Wiki and associated websites. And they also were outsourcing it to Toei, as they had with the other stuff. For historical context, Toei in 1985 and into 86, they're finishing up Dr. Slump, Kinnikuman Man, Fist of the North Star is beginning, as is 2 of their biggest franchises to this day, Saint Seiya and Dragon Ball. The artists who are working on all of those things are also animating Inhumanoids.
It seems like working less hard on this.
That is what Flint Dille felt as well, actually, in his book.
They weren't paid enough to care to make this look good, but there were so many animation errors, I had to rewind to make sure certain things were happening that were insinuating that were happening. It just felt like, is this what was going on in this scene? And then you have to watch it a bunch of times to see like how the pieces were supposed to line up but didn't.
Yeah, I have a note. I'm like, I don't know, where the issues was. I guess it was because Toei was just overworked. But I'm like, wait, they cut from this to that. Was there supposed to be a filler scene we didn't see of these people going from over here to over there? Wait, these people were separated. Now they're back together again as a group. It's a lot of that. In all the episodes.
Did Metlar fall down or did he get back up?
Yeah.
What happened here? Yeah. In my opinion, Toei was getting bigger and bigger in their domestic market. And while they're taking on even more overseas work, because they're the top people for Sunbow, but also in 86, they're working on, several Deke productions. They're working on Real Ghostbusters as well. And the next year is when they're going to work on Ninja Turtles. So they have so many American things they're being offered. The market is so hot, Toei can't say no. So instead, they say yes, and they're like, yeah, we're giving you Toei quality. And then they instead subcontract it secretly and then hand it back to Sunbow, which honestly, again, I don't blame Toei for doing that. You're being used for a thing you don't own by a toy company who doesn't even give your credit on the fucking show.
Slight derail, but speaking of outsourcing, and because we did Invincible last time I was here, you saw the news story about some studios were found possibly outsourcing animation to North Korean studios?
Oh,
yes,
I
did see that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, obviously, it doesn't look like anyone involved. It's so many layers deep from the people, who what you would call the creators of Invincible. It looks like there's a lot of deny. They didn't know from what we could tell. It's like they outsourced to this company, who outsourced to another one, who outsourced to another one, and they were the ones that might have used some animators in North Korea, I guess they went through a Chinese studio, which is pretty much the only way you can get access to North Korean anything.
Yeah, I was wondering how things make it in and out of North Korea.
Pretty much always has to be through some Chinese companies, yeah.
I remember seeing that headline. It was shocking to see. I mean, work with them or not, I get they're an enemy state. But I mean, it's how the outsourcing is going to go in that direction all the time. That's where the money pushes it to. So in this case, though, yes, Flint Dille in his book, paraphrasing, we worked with Toei lots of times and they did a great job. He felt that they did not get the best out of Toei and that they were subcontracting. Though also Dille, he doesn't say exactly what, but he did say at this time, Marvel Productions and Sunbow were also really getting into a lot of arguments over production and budget issues. So what I'm reading into that is that either Sunbow or Marvel wanted to spend less. It could be they gave less money to Toei, and then Toei was like, well, if you gave us less budget on this, then we're not going to put as much effort into it either. Definitely implied there was something to do with the Marvel and Sunbow production issues, then trickling down to Toei, causing this to be a lesser production for Toei. I mean, I still think it looks better than, like, say, a Dong Yang episode of a cartoon. Or I saw some worse-looking Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends from the year before this aired.
Yeah, I mean, technically the drawings are competent. It's just how things are stitched up together. It often doesn't make a lot of sense. There's the bad continuity, I guess.
Well, Dilly does say that episodes came in about a minute shorter than they were supposed to be, and that he said, especially with the first 5-parter, he sat over a Moviola machine for like a week with the editor to try to stitch it together as best they could with no retake budget. You know, once it's out, they get their footage back for those 5 episodes. And the voice cast, by the way, that they use was a lot of the Sunbow regulars. You got Neil Ross, who most famously is Shipwreck in G.I. Joe. He's Herc, the lead guy. Though these guys, they're not the most memorable other than Augur, the bald guy, because he's just such a jerk. Richard Sanders is Digger, a.k.a. Bright, and he's WKRP in Cincinnati's Les Nessman, and Bob, for you, Bernard Bernoulli from Day of the Tentacle.
That's right, yeah. Obviously more famous for his WKRP role, but wait, he's in this episode? Is he in this one?
He's the nerd.
Okay.
Because he's the one who talks to the trees, right? Yeah, he's not in this one as much. He's bigger in the first 2 episodes. Because he's like the doctor who designed the suits.
Got it. I didn't recognize his voice. That's odd. But hey, I think he's still kicking, maybe.
I think so. I was checking his internet for is versus was on his IMDb, but...
Yeah, he's as old as Joe Biden, which means he can run for president still. He's still virile.
Les Nesman for president sounds like something that would happen. Also, you've got Michael Bell doing double duty as both the hot-headed Augur and the evil Blackthorn. Most famous to kids of our generation as both Drew Pickles and Chucky's dad in Rugrats. Or if you're a big Soul Reaver fan, he was Raz or Raziel in the Soul Reaver games.
I mean, he was a billion things. He was also, I believe, Quacker Jack in Darkwing Duck.
Yes, yeah. I think he even did Quacker Jack in a DuckTales episode of recent DuckTales, I think.
Unless I had him confused with someone else. He also was, I think, Duke on G.I. Joe.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Who was, again, at least in the early seasons of G.I. Joe, he was like the main guy leader.
He's the guy who goes into a coma in the G.I. Joe movie.
Oh, that's right.
Then as Liquidator, we've got William Calloway. That's the touchy-feely guy who's talking about the collective unconscious in this episode.
This episode introduces children to Jungian philosophy and beliefs.
So funny. And then we have the one girl, Susan Silo, who worked on a ton of other shows and still is an active voice actress to this day. She's Sandra Shore, and Ed Gilbert as Metlar. But of course, my favorite and yours, Chris Latta, a.k.a. Chris Collins. He's decomposed, and he's doing the thing he always does, screaming horribly all of the time.
God, he was put on this earth for that reason alone.
In case you don't know, Chris Latta, which is how he's credited in all the Sunbow stuff, he was Cobra Commander and Starscream, both wonderful screamers. He was almost Mr. Burns, and he blew it. Bob, you also found that you just showed off another of his famous video game things he did, or infamous.
Yeah, apparently he was the first live-action King Koopa in the syndicated cartoon program King Koopa's Cool Cartoons, which just aired for about 3 months in the fall of 1989. He's in green face, folks. It's not fun to look at. And apparently, according to other people's research, there were some problems on the set. This man had a lot of demons. He was hired to be mean to children as his Koopa persona. Sometimes he was too mean. He hated his job, he hated his life, and another guy was brought in to replace him in this seldom seen, almost lost media program that over time more and more clips are coming out as to what this was.
Yeah, it's like, what if the Krusty the Clown show was real and the guy was miserable in every second of doing it? Yeah, the Chris Latta... I found 2 very funny stories I hadn't seen before when doing this. One was an old quote from Hank Azaria talking about how he got hired because Chris Latta, though he doesn't use a lot his name, but he says, yeah, it turned out I got the job and hired, especially to voice Mo, because the guy before was just a dick. Like, apparently that he was just unbearable to work with. And so they're like, get this guy out of here. And Hank Azaria framed it as, you know, this guy blew it. He could be Hank Azaria and be a rich Simpsons voice actor and still be alive, but he was too much of an asshole.
He missed one hell of a gravy train.
Though the life he was living, all the stories you read, it's like, it's not surprising Chris Latta passed away at 44. Like, Flint Dille in his book talks about how he basically talks around the drug issues because he's like, Chris Latta was my friend. You can talk to the other voice actors if you want to hear stories about his alleged drug problems. I don't know anything about that, and I don't want to comment, but he was my friend. And I was like, well, that's nice. Though his first story of meeting Chris Latta, or his first story for Chris Latta, was that he bailed him out of jail for what Chris Latta said was a jaywalking charge.
Uh-huh. And was his penis out?
Sure it was.
So, and apparently he went through like a 12-step program at one point and apologized to Dille, but no, it sounds Chris Latta had a lot of problems. But boy, he gave everything. This stand-up comic who was just doing these toy commercials on the side, he gave everything to screaming, horrible monster characters whenever he played them.
How he ever had a voice box left after any of these recording sessions, I would never understand. He must have had to take 2-week breaks between these sessions and just ice packs constantly on his throat or something.
Voice acting legend Greg Berger had said he loved working with Chris Latta, but he would be covered in his spit if he were recording in the same room with him. They're working on the 5 episodes at some point based on the timeline of things. So the prevailing wisdom on the internet says that, oh, they canceled the show before they even finished it. But I really don't think that's not where the timeline runs up. And Flint Dille says that in one old interview, but then in his book, he does not say that. And when I see the timelines of things, I don't think that's how it worked. So basically, the first 5 episodes are their own production codes. The remaining 8, that Hasbro is so into Inhumanoids that before they finish the 5 episodes, they then okay the production of 8 more episodes to make it a regular 13-episode block. And that's how they did with the Transformers, too. They ordered 13 Transformers for the first season, and then when it did so well, then they ordered 52 more to make it the full 65 for the next year. That seemed to be what they thought they would do with Inhumanoids, too. And we're going to have like a summer debut of the first 5 episodes, and then the remaining 8 would be in October. It's also funny that they get really crazy in those. Flint Dille says that with his team, they got to be even wackier. There is an episode where Metlar kidnaps the Statue of Liberty, animates it, and marries it, or wants to marry it.
Wow, okay. I'm sad that I didn't watch that far to see this. He's lonely. He's lonely.
He's a and guess what? When she turns human, or when she comes to life, she's a real nag who wants him to clean up his act. Yeah. But so, yes, the Super Sunday episodes premiere and in July, and they're going to get a VHS release. Though actually, I learned that it wasn't FHE that did those ones, who normally did work on Sunbow stuff. It was High Tops Video, which was a competitor of FHE that was a bunch of old FHE employees saying, we could run our own video channel and video release company. And Inhumanoids was one of their first releases.
Oh, yeah, I recognize this logo. I must have rented something with it.
When I looked at their list of releases, the one I knew it from must have been, I believe, the Madballs or My Pet Monster movies.
Oh, I'm looking this up now, and they handled a ton of the Peanut specials released to VHS, and I rented those constantly.
That's gotta be it. Man, that's a big deal. Once you land the Peanuts VHS deal, that's a company starter for old High Tops. So yes, now what Dille says about when they got canceled, this doesn't exactly line up for me, because basically somebody scanned the Toy Fair magazine, with not the Wizard affiliated one. Toy Fair was a industry catalog for toy buyers to buy their toys for the fall into Christmas season. And the 1986 version has that big ad for all the Inhumanoid stuff, meaning that in the summer, Hasbro was saying, let's start selling Inhumanoids for Christmas time and for the fall. So that would mean that there's no way they would cancel the show before those 8 episodes were produced, which some people allege was the deal. Like, that lineup just doesn't work for me. For a show that's going to get the next order of episodes done in October, then they wouldn't cancel it before they even had the fall release of the Inhumanoids toys, you know?
Yeah.
They do have the second set of episodes. I would bet by the time the last of them aired, they would know the toy line was dead then. Though it is also interesting, if you watch them in order, it actually is a continuing continuity from episode to episode. Like, they often end, even after the first 5, they end with a cliffhanger to go into the next one. And also, thanks to the connective tissue of the Geraldo Rivera parody, they also sort of were connected to G.I. Joe. And there's another character they introduced later in the series that people say is Ace from G.I. Joe, character named Ace from G.I. Joe, but they never committed to that. It was, compared to Gem and the Holograms and Transformers, it was kind of a low bar for them. Now, sales figures are hard to come by at the time. Flint Dille does say he had heard the toys made $70 million. Now, that number sounds crazy to me in 80s money, that is not profitable enough for Hasbro to continue with a toy line, $70 million, you know?
Yeah, unless other toy lines are making $120 million or something. Maybe the bar for success was very high, but $70 million in 1986 dollars sounds like a lot of money compared to what they're spending on this program.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, you know, TMNT in their first real Christmas, they broke $100 million easy. So it's not Ninja Turtles big, but it was a profitable thing. Though, of course, Hasbro was in a bad place by the end of 86 because of the flop of the Transformers movie. Like, that did really fuck him up. Yes, what Dille says in his book is that they were starting to write scripts for a second season, and then Hasbro killed those. Like, they were writing what they would make in the second set of episodes, or third set, but they were told, no, you can't. We're done with this. It's such a weird show. It does feel like guys getting away with something while Hasbro's not watching the bank, basically, or like, you know, they're sneaking things past. And it's full of things that a network censor would never, ever approve of.
Yeah, a lot of this surprised me, especially all of the corpses and body horror, especially.
Oh my God, the body horror.
Yeah. And then later episodes, you know, I didn't watch all of the other ones, but I watched some bits and pieces and looked at, was a video I saw on YouTube of a guy just doing reviews. And there's eventually like a doctor who, I'm not a fan of the name. They call him Dr. Mangler, which I think is a direct connection to, I'm not even going to say his name, but yeah, Nazi guy. And he gets seemingly killed in one episode and then brought back to life as like a half robot, half skeleton monster from both like Decompose and the main human enemy that we see in this episode, Blackthorn. And I can't believe they would get away with something like that on a show ostensibly for children.
Yeah, there are a lot of Nazi references in kids' cartoons up until, I would say, maybe the 2000s or maybe even the 2010s. They weren't taking Nazis as seriously. Of course, it was all jokes about Nazis and the villains were made to look like Nazis. Now we realize there's a lot of baggage with that imagery, and we kind of want to avoid it in kids' entertainment.
I've said it before, but a lot of the credit to that goes to, or the reasoning for that, I think, is Steven Spielberg, like, especially in Raiders in 1941, I guess, too. But in Raiders of the Lost Ark, he made them movie villains, not as, you know, you didn't think of the Nuremberg trials, you know, and all of their actual, like, full-on crimes. You just see, like, these are at least two children who watch Indiana Jones movies. They think these are the baddest bad people for some reason. But so what killed Inhumanoids? You know, was it that the sales weren't as good as G.I. Joe and Transformers? That's a little bit of it. But the fellow Inhumanoids writer, Buzz Dixon, had, I think, the best take I found, which is one, the toys were crappy. They weren't good toys. You couldn't make them stand up. They were very hard to play with, and they're ugly. When you take the helmet off, look up the Earth Core guys, take the helmet off of them. They basically have a tiny G.I. Joe head on a huge body, and they look stupid. If you try to walk around with Meltar, he falls over. His head breaks. Like, it's just, these were poor toys compared to G.I. Joe and Transformers.
Oh,
just
boy,
bad
yeah.
quality. It's just so ugly.
The Redwood Tree toys, all they did was their bodies extended to make them a little taller.
Yes, yeah, in a very phallic way.
Yeah.
And the granites
like
are
there
just
are-
friggin' rocks. Magnetite or Magnetor or whatever. He's just like two rocks that squish together and they're one rock. Like, they're just ugly. I would have never begged my mommy for these. When I say mommy, know that I'm doing that comedically, listeners. I don't say that normally. But also Buzz Dixon brings up, too, that the fall of 1986 was flooded with TV cartoon toys. Like, there were so many that Inhumanoids had no space in the market. Like, there's only so many hours on the 3-channel and maybe a UHF channel era in 1986. Inhumanoids was having trouble finding space with so much competition. And also it was probably a little too weird and mature for some markets. Like, I would think some guys who own those syndicated local channels were like, what's with all this, like, screaming zombies? Like, ugh.
I could see parents turning this off. I could see kids having nightmares because of this.
Flint Dille makes a good point that Inhumanoids never got any of the satanic panic. Meanwhile, My Little Pony, because of like one cutie mark, was called satanic for a time around the same era.
Yeah, these things are just creatures from hell that turn you into zombies.
The character in this episode says, like, well, Meltar's basically the devil, right? Like,
yeah. And we have like the line, how do you kill what's already dead?
That's insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, seeing myself as a 4-year-old when these came out, and this wasn't even marketed to me, but like, they're ugly. I wouldn't want them. I can see why a lot of kids didn't now. And what also too, it helped Transformers. The G.I. Joe starts with a cool idea and good designs. Transformers, they just steal the best Japanese toys that were really cool too. Meanwhile, like when Hasbro has to build their own boy toys for the first time in this set, I think it shows you these designers weren't up for the task. Now, Inhumanoids did inspire some very dedicated online fans. Flint Dille has said that for all the Transformers fans he's met, the most intense fans are the Inhumanoid fans.
Of course they are. They have nothing else. They have these 13 episodes to rub together, and I guess some comic books too.
Yes, they got 4 issues of a Marvel comic. That also tells you how poorly Inhumanoids sold, because basically 3 months in is when you know how well a comic is sold, and the fact that it ends on the 4th issue tells you it did not sell good enough for Marvel Comics in the 80s. It did over time. It would get some reruns, but not that much. The VHS release of the movie and some episodes happened. Then there was a DVD release, limited DVD release in the US, but in Europe they got a full DVD release in the big aughts DVD to TV boom. And then there was a little bit of a thing going on, like some talk of, maybe Inhumanoids could come back. There was some article somewhere once where Kevin Smith said he would like to do an Inhumanoids cartoon. Like, he was trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I'm surprised there was no... 2005 seemed like a good year for the Inhumanoids reboots, where there would be some internet thing or a comic miniseries. This is really the time where things that couldn't continue became comic books. Like, there was another season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in comic form. All the things you wanted Ash from Evil Dead to do, well, he was doing them in bad comic books.
X-Files too, I remember. It was a funny time. Well, we were just talking about that on the Bender's Big Score podcast, about how the mid-aughts were when nerds got to have their things come back if they spent enough money on it. And it was fun at the time, and I think most people feel it had set a bad precedent for today. But here was the problem, as it turned out for Hasbro, learned with Inhumanoids. As they're starting to build up those comic books for Transformers and G.I. Joe, and starting to see, like, oh, do we want to do a new hardcore thing? Maybe, add it to the big hit Michael Bay Transformers movies or the G.I. Joe movie we're trying to do. This is when Hasbro learns that somebody in the office screwed up and they lost the copyright to Inhumanoids. Like, it went bad and it got yanked by some copyright squatter. So they do not own the Inhumanoids any longer. There actually was a comic writer in 2009 who was working on Transformers and G.I. Joe stuff, and he wanted to put in Inhumanoids in there. Like, the Inhumanoids, like, decompose fighting Optimus Prime, that'd be fun.
Sure.
But he started putting in, like, little breadcrumbs to it, and then they stopped because he learned Hasbro didn't have the rights and they couldn't put the Inhumanoids in it anymore.
So now just some guy is the Inhumanoids master.
Seemingly, yeah. And that's why all of the episodes from those DVD rips, we should be thankful that those European DVDs came out, because now it would end up in the same places that Captain Simeon show we covered, of just like nobody owns it and it's not archived anywhere except from VHS recordings off TV.
Yeah, and it's all on YouTube, very easy to find. Yeah, there was no Captain Simeon DVD release, so all we have are this really bad recordings from the mid to late 90s.
Inhumanoids is in a much better place in that way. So you can watch it all on YouTube right now, and they're the DVD rips, so they look about as good as they're going to get. I would definitely think Toei burned the Masters if they ever kept it in the first place. Toei takes shitty care of Sailor Moon Masters and Dragon Ball Masters.
Yeah.
I'm sure they don't care about Inhumanoids.
If they lose the audio for Dragon Ball, they're not taking care of Inhumanoids, you know?
Those are being kept in the salt mine somewhere for perfect preservation. So yes, technically, you may never see more official new Inhumanoids because it's not owned by Hasbro, and as far as I can tell, it's nobody who owns it. I believe the person who owns Inhumanoids now only owns it in the hopes that Hasbro will offer them a bunch of money to buy it back. But that is the history of Inhumanoids with a noble end for our characters. But why don't we take a quick break? And when we come back, we will talk about the third episode of Inhumanoids, The Evil That Lies Within, Part 3.
Inhumanoids will return after these messages.
Ordinary weapons are useless against Metlar. Only EarthCore's trapper vehicle can stop the Inhumanoid.
Detach grappling hook! After him!
Inhumanoids! Inhumanoids!
The evil that lies within us!
Coming right for us! Take the hovercraft! Trappers ready! There's Metlar! Taste the claw, Metlar!
Trapper vehicle. Figures sold separately from Hasbro.
Inhumanoids!
Vacation starts with VA. One thing you'll love about your trip to Virginia is that you'll never have to settle for one thing. All that you love is all in one trip. Start yours at virginia.org.
You love podcasts, the stories, the laughs, the unexpected turns. But when this episode ends, the silence starts. Not anymore. Audiobooks.com turns that silence into your next great adventure. With over 450,000 titles, from bestsellers to hidden gems, your love for listening just found its new best friend. And because you already know the joy of audio, we're giving you 3 free audiobooks to start your journey. Imagine your favorite podcast, now with unlimited episodes. That's audiobooks.com. Keep the story going. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. Because for podcast lovers like you, the end of an episode is just the beginning. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.
This is a very toyetic Henry Gilbert welcoming you to the break.
Hey everybody, it's Bob Mackey. I'm a dinosaur with a skeleton outside of my body.
And a big thank you to our guest this week, Andrew Bouvier, a super patron who chose us to cover Inhumanoids. And if you would like to be an awesome patron like Andrew, you should go over to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons and support us today.
That's right. If you head over to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons and sign up at the $5 level, you'll get over 150 bonus episodes immediately up front, covering things like Futurama, King of the Hill, Mission Hill, The Critic, and Batman the Animated Series. And that $5 a month also gets you regular monthly episodes of both Talking Futurama and Talking of the Hill. And again, the second you sign up, you'll get 7 years worth of Patreon exclusive content only for patrons of patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. And if you like all that stuff, we have a $10 level. When you sign up for that, you get all the $5 stuff, of course, but then you also get one immensely long podcast once a month only for patrons of that $10 level or higher. And what is that, Henry?
Bob's talking about the What a Cartoon movie podcast. You get to hear the free feed preview of it each month if you're a listener on this, but you can only hear the full thing if you sign up. And last month, you got to hear a little preview of our covering of Futurama's direct-to-video movie, Bender's Big Score. The month before that, we covered 1990's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the live-action adaptation, which really holds up well. And this month begins our traditional Summer of Disney Renaissance, where we cover Mulan. You're going to hear us talk about the Disney classic Mulan super in depth. Often we cover these for more than 5 or even 6 hours, and you can hear the full thing and 5 years of a back catalog, over 250 hours of What a Cartoon movies, in addition to all the ad-free classic podcasts you'll hear at the $5 level if you sign up at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons.
And if you've never signed up for Patreon before, it's so easy to do. And the second you sign up, you can listen to all of our bonus podcasts alongside all your normal podcasts as part of your podcasting lifestyle. And there is an app that Patreon has for any smart device you might have. And you can download that app and listen to our content that way as well. But no matter which way you do it, it's so easy to access all of the podcasts waiting for you at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons.
So thanks again for listening, folks. We will now get back to part 3 of the Inhumanoids debut movie, The Evil That Lies Within.
Turns living things into fiendish creatures.
He's got Lurks! I'm going after that zombie.
Inhumanoids! Inhumanoids!
The evil that lies within.
Decompose! Let him go, bonehead! This will stop ya. Sunlight! Oh no! You are mine, human.
Decompose and other figures sold separately from Hasbro.
Inhumanoids!
And now, back to Inhumanoids.
Inhumanoids! Inhumanoids!
The evil that lies within. From down in the fiery depths of the earth where nightmares begin.
Inhumanoids! Inhumanoids!
The evil that lies within.
And we are back. You just got to hear the Inhumanoids theme, which is exactly the type of theme I would have thought it is. It's quick. You repeat the name over and over and over again so kids learn it.
Inhumanoids.
What's that name again?
Inhumanoids.
I forgot.
Exactly. You know what to scream. You sing it at your mother when you're in the toy store.
I mean, yeah, the tune of it is even the Transformers, like Transformers more than meets the eye. And here it's like Inhumanoids, the evil that like name. Tagline, name. Same deal. And also G.I. Joe, the real American hero. G.I. Joe is there. Same programming.
The
so
Teenage
you're not...
Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I do wonder if part of the failure of this is that the show, the toy line, everything is named after the bad guys, not the good guys. It's an interesting decision that you don't usually see that often.
You know, I think you got a good point there because the bad guys, well, they're not cool enough, though. It's not like if this was a Godzilla show, that it'd be a cool enough bad guy, but also they wouldn't make Godzilla the bad guy. But yeah, these bad guys are the names. And then the good guys, they suck. They're not good. Their lasers don't hurt anybody. They're always losing. Like, they suck.
Yeah, I kept thinking of Prince of Space while watching this because all of their weapons were so useless.
Yeah. The only weapon who seems effective is Liquidators because he can just summon whatever liquid he needs at any time, apparently. But all it does is slightly get them out of danger for the next 5 minutes, and then they're back into it again.
Liquidator is their main cliffhanger saver. But yes, that theme is written by Kinder and Bryant, the same songwriting duo who did G.I. Joe and Transformers and all of the Hasbro ads at that time. Kinder and Bryant is Ford Kinder and Ann Bryant. And I did find an old interview with Ann Bryant, so old it was filmed in SD on a camcorder, but she said Inhumanoids was her favorite, one of her favorites to write of all of those because she just loved her Ford Kinder, the guy who did it. He was screaming so much at the end of it, like she thought that was so fun. As for the, this is Flint Dilley's the writer. The director is nobody. There's a supervising director named Ray Lee, but based on his credits, I would say he is a manager and not an animating director.
Yeah, that would happen around this time and earlier. Just the person in charge of the studio would be supervising director.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this has no clear director named. All the storyboarders are, of course, just in a big pile of storyboarders credited and overlooked. Yeah, so to know the artists who work on this, very few. And the names I saw, unlike, say, on Transformers, where instantly my eye is drawn to Peter Chung in the storyboarder names, not the case on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And Toei didn't even get an animation services by credit.
Yeah, it feels like I didn't take that close look at the credits. It feels like they were sent extremely rough storyboards, which explains why the continuity in the show is so poor. It's just they were meant to put together the logic of the storytelling, and they didn't have all the resources that the writers did.
I think you're totally right, Bob. I did see some of the storyboards for different episodes, and they are not like today's storyboards, which are almost essentially layouts. Like this is, very rough, tiny storyboards that are around script pages. Again, Toei being handed this and told, lay it all out, do all the color design. Try to find the fucking mouth chart that works for all of these monsters.
Yeah, I'm looking at the credits now, and I see layouts created by 2 people. No way in hell.
No.
They might be approving things, but I don't want to discount their work. But for a show like this, in 13 episodes, you need more than 2 people doing layouts.
Yes. I say it all the time, but it's, the resulting quality of almost all of these depended on the overseas company you sent them to and whether they could do a good job or not. I do love the 6-fingered weird hand that grips the title name. I do like that, though it belongs to no character. No character has those 6 fingers.
Yeah, when I first saw the clips, I'm like, oh, that's got to be Decompose's hand. But no, he's standard, just 4 fingers, and they're much thicker. And I'm sure he has 4 or 5, but not 6, and they're thicker, not quite as skeletal as those hands.
They were going to reveal him in season 2, I think, the 6-fingered creature.
And Metlar has weird, it's 2 claws up and 2 claws down. It's weird, kind of pincery thing. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah. And Tendril, of course, has tendrils.
Yeah.
One thing I like about the intro is that the very last shot, other than the hand and the logo itself, is all the heroes falling in the pit of lava. They're dead.
Yes.
I don't know how you get out of that.
I really question that as well. What happens now?
I think that shows you the differences and the problems for marketing it as far as a commercial goes, because you think of the opening of, say, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you get to see them winning and beating up foot soldiers. The Transformers and the X-Men 92 both end with the guys clash with each other, and oh boy, you're going to see a clash. What's the final shot you see of this one? Your heroes and the people they tried to save, these 2 regular people, fall into lava seemingly to die. They're losers. They then head into the fiery core of the earth, and this is where some versions of the episode have the previously on, some don't, but I like this narrator voice in the previously on, so I grabbed it from this one.
The Inhumanoids aren't their only problem. The evil Blackthorn Shore has pressured Senator Masterson into cutting off all funds for EarthCorps. Things look bleak indeed, but the day is saved at the last minute by Blackthorn's rich sister, Sandra Shore. Now a member of EarthCorps, Sandra joins the team as they head down once more in a desperate attempt to stop Decompose and Tendril from freeing their master, the most evil Inhumanoid of them all, Metlar. Hit him with everything you've got! Even the combined forces of EarthCorps and the Granites are not enough to stop the release of Metlar, who now turns to thoughts of revenge.
I'm free and shall be forever!
It really bothered me in this how Metlar's name isn't Meltar, because he's a guy underground that's full of magma. I feel like they missed it completely.
How many times in my notes I wrote down Meltar and had to go nope, wait,
so it wasn't just me. Okay.
I mean, again, we're talking about this as a commercial. That's brand confusion. If a kid's first thought is going to be Meltar, name it Meltar. Don't call it Metlar. It looks like a typo. Though I guess if I'm them, I would think we got kids to tell their moms to buy a Megatron and Optimus Prime. This is no more silly of a name. That gets you up to speed here that Metlar has been freed. He's going to be fucking up everything here. He had been held by magnet rings for thousands of years underground, which at the end of the last episode when he's freed, I love it because when they find him, he has been fully conscious the entire time, and so has the magnet guy who's been holding him in place. And just the idea that they've had a consciousness for 2,000 years and we're standing there the entire time is hilarious.
What do they talk about?
I don't know. That does sound boring. Ugh. You think they would just let him free just for something to do? You're like, I'm getting sick of holding this guy in place. Let him go romp around a bit, then we'll just capture him again.
You would think Metlar would have had better plans after all of his time to think, too. Or he'd just be insane, or more insane. I have to question that line that, like, the fiery core of the earth where nightmares begin. I'm like, is that really where nightmares begin, is the fiery core of the earth? I don't know. I guess for hell, sure. All right. but yeah, so this is where we learn that they lost their federal funding. It is funny in the episode before this where they learn they've all lost their federal funding. They hang up the phone and they go like, well, guys, what are we going to do now? And they say, get in the unemployment line. And then behind them is a very long unemployment line of people on the dole.
Oh.
More social commentary.
Yep.
Condemnation of Reagan's America or of people that need help?
I wonder, in that scene, unlike in this episode, Augur didn't immediately like start beating up all of the people in line for unemployment, saying like, you're shiftless and lazy. Get to work.
I think Augur is mostly mad that he was not allowed to have a real drill. Instead, he's got an orb that makes drill noises.
He has a bloodlust, that guy. Also, note that Sandra is there. She's the philanthropist paying for everything. She's the sister of Blackthorn, the big evil guy, who, I mean, he doesn't not look like Donald Trump to me, but he never came up as a reference of inspiration by Dilly for who Blackthorn is.
This liquidator guy, though, it looks like he's about to graduate at all times.
I'm not even sure how he walks. The orbs on his legs he can't put his legs together. He's going to be waddling everywhere he goes.
To me, Liquidator with his big beard and hair, he looks like the guy from like the Joy of Sex pages when you see the hairy hippies in the Joy of Sex books, if you ever saw those. And then Sandra, of course, because she's not going to be a toy, she has a very boring outfit, just like no fun colors or anything, just white and purple metal.
She's never wearing her helmet.
You know what? That's going to come back to haunt her.
Could have solved a lot of problems later on.
When a monster gently brushes her cheek.
But yeah, as Medlar is running around, you're just seeing them all shoot lasers at Medlar, and it doesn't do anything. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, you want to build up your big bad, but I think it also does make the Earth Corps look like losers. And Medlar, also with his vague powers, he also can maybe hypnotize people, maybe. He can also bring things to life. We'll find out later.
Yeah, it's very confusing. They just kind of give him whatever they need.
Yeah.
He has both a mouthful of lava, but also pulls like rocks out of his mouth to throw sometimes. He's got the hypnotize, and then, in episode 4 or 5, and then later, like he said, of the Statue of Liberty, he can make statues come alive somehow.
This opening scene is just chaos and confusion because Metlar is encountering these guys on their little vehicle. He throws a stalactite in front of the vehicle to stop it. The vehicle doesn't actually hit the stalactite. It stops, but for whatever reason, it explodes. And then a guy jumps out of it. I'm like, what? That's one of the many scenes I had to watch 4 or 5 times to realize, whatever they wanted to happen here wasn't communicated well overseas, and overseas just said, okay, we're going to animate the drawings you gave us.
And understand that this is after Flint Dille and the other editors worked really hard to stitch it together as best they could. Imagine the raw footage they got.
Yeah, and I did notice, obviously in the 80s, all these toy cartoons did the same thing where it was when you are starting the first episode, if it was a sequel from the previous one, or when you're coming back from the commercial breaks, you repeat a few seconds of the previous footage from before, to, in case someone just turned the channel or whatever. But the amount of footage that they reuse from like the previous cliffhanger, I've noticed, was 2 to 3 times as long as I'm used to seeing on like a G.I. Joe or a Transformers. And I think, to Henry's point, that's probably why, is them trying to salvage what they could out of, from not paying Toei enough money.
Get them to 22 minutes. Get it to 22 minutes. Yeah. So yes, Metlar hypnotizes 3 of them, grabs them in his big old hand, and I get why he's doing this too as far as the commercial aspect go, because the design of Metlar is supposed to be, he eats the other toys. He's a monster. Like, that's how big and scary he is. Like, same with, the decompose. The reason he has the exposed rib cage is you open the rib cage as a toy, put toys inside of it, and close the rib cage. Though then even in their commercials demonstrating it, the rib cage can't close fully on the Earth Core toys.
Man, they should have mocked up a fake toy that actually worked.
A G.I. Joe would fit in there just fine, but the toys you're supposed to buy for him, yeah, it sucks. Then Metlar is about to eat all of them in his big boiling mouth, which is a cool design. I do like that. And then, yes, Liquidator, the most effective member of the team, just blasts some water in Meltar's face, and he just drops him. Metlar, I just said it, Meltar.
Yeah. Every time I'm about to say it, I have to stop and think about it.
But Liquidator just blasts him in the face with some water, and like a loser, he just drops him. He's like, water. Then Augur, they get thrown aside, and this is when we get one of the few fun, snippy moments here. The Flint Dille, I think the most fun he had writing this was for the banter between our bickering scientists.
Oh! These suits are tough. Of course, I designed them.
Obviously, you're okay. Sandra?
Yeah.
Again, that's Dr. Bright being like, yeah, they're really good suits because I made them. Duh. Like, yeah. There's actually, I watched another one. I think it was The Evil Eye. And the funny bit in that is Augur is presumed dead for part of it. And when he gets back to the base to reveal he's alive, Bright, the nerd, is arguing with everybody else to cheap out on Augur's funeral, saying like, well, he's not going to know. Like,
everybody hates Augur.
Yeah. It's just so funny. Like, moments like that were my biggest chuckle in watching some Inhumanoids. Then Augur also gives Metlar a hot foot, which you would think would not do anything to a guy with lava on the inside, but it does.
Apparently it does, yeah.
These are real Bugs Bunny tactics.
I'm surprised Hotfoot, well, if this had been on a network, they would have been told, hey, that's an imitatable act. You don't tell kids what a Hotfoot is.
I think after 1960, we stopped having these slow-burning matches in shoes that had the little notch in the heel you could jam a match into. I feel like that was successfully done maybe 3 times in history.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah. It actually probably is pretty hard to give a Hotfoot.
It's like, you distract the guy to make sure he does not notice me putting a match in his shoe and sneaking up behind him. This is going to be the dumbest guy in the world you're giving the hot foot to.
And then Decompose is screaming around there too, and just a breathy Chris Latta voices are all fighting each other. And then when Metlar gets his hot foot, he falls on his back and needs to be helped up like a turtle. Like, this guy's a loser too.
He's got the same weakness as Bender. Although times you saw Metlar get up, he was slightly on his side.
Yeah, he's just screaming, "Get me off my back!"
What they need the magnets for? They could have just toppled him over in the first place, just left him there.
Yes. Yeah. And this is when they start running away. And once he's back up, then he's throwing. I mean, I do love the animation of him pulling rocks out of his mouth, like sticking his hand into his throat and pulling out things to throw. Like, that looks cool.
Yeah, he feels like a real video game boss to me.
Inhumanoids definitely should have had a video game. But also, yeah, this is when it hit me how often it's not about direct contact of throwing a thing directly at somebody. It's about, like, when they throw a grenade later, they throw it at a stalactite to drop down on somebody. When Metlar throws these rocks, he doesn't throw them to hit these guys. He throws them to hit like a wall or a ceiling that will then drop on the guys. All this indirect damage.
It's all about tactically using landslides to defeat your enemy. It's a good thing this show takes place underground mostly.
Yes. It's like how there's always a fjord.
It's real lousy with stalactites.
You know, I failed my science test as a kid that I had to Google that these were stalactites versus stalagmites.
What do you call them? Mnemonic is stalactite because they grow from the top of the cavern. Whereas stalagmites are on the bottom. I don't know if there's a way to connect mite to floor, but tight for top.
The one I use is that they hang tight to the ceiling.
That works too.
Maybe I made up this bad mnemonic in my brain, but I always thought it was like, oh, a stalag might fall on you from the ceiling. But like, no.
Incorrect. I think they just have come up in so many video games that stalactites are a bigger problem than stalagmites. So tights are the ones I recall. They're always falling on you in video games.
I need to rewrite the mnemonic in my brain to be like, a stalag might trip you. There.
Yeah, there you go.
There
you go.
Perfect.
Fortunately, Sandra has a device that tells her exactly where a secret chamber is. I mean, they even joke about it. They say, like, I could use a secret chamber right about now.
Is this a really, I mean, again, this is just weird visual storytelling. The secret chamber seems to be one room away from where everyone else is, which is why the monsters just bash down one wall. Like, oh, there they are.
Also, when this is a bad time for Toei to half-ass it because giant monsters all of the time are going to be of shifting size in every shot or even the same shot. They had that problem enough in Transformers, but I feel like it's twice as bad in Inhumanoids.
Yeah, it's like any given time, they could be from 10 to 50 feet tall based on the relative size of them holding the people or standing next to them.
Also, yes, this was another bit where I was like, wait, no, this is wrong. Like, Metlarth froze a thing, and then stalactites fall, but they seem to fall on him. But then he's up again in the next shot. Like, I was very confused.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Blackthorn watches on from the outside as they get to the secret city of the Granites.
You name your son Blackthorn, you're kind of guaranteeing him a path in life. Because that's his first name, because he's Sandra's brother. So they have the same last name. So he's Blackthorn. I forget their last name, but
Sure.
Yeah, so he's Blackthorn Shore.
Yes.
And like with everything else in this show, he's the bad guy. His suit is a much cooler design than the EarthCore suits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's hilarious in the first episode where Sandra has a meeting with him, and he's like, "Sister, I thought I told you you'd be the public face, and I take care of the business." And then she looks at his desk and in 1 second is like, "Wait, these are all giant evil plans. You're fired." And he's like, "I don't think so." Like, how did they work together for like a decade before this?
I just figured it out. You're evil.
In the first episode, his oil drilling is what unlocks Tendril, while meanwhile it's the idiot EarthCore guys who they find a giant amber rock they take out of the ground, and then later they're like, "Oh, there was a giant zombie monster inside. Who could have thought?"
To their credit, they thought it was a dinosaur.
Yeah, also they just steal it from one of the Fleischer Superman cartoons we covered with the dinosaur and ice. But yeah, so Blackthorn watches on evilly, and then we also get to hear Metlar has some questions about humans as just learning about these new creatures.
I have not seen those metal creatures before.
Metal only provides the shell. Surface-dwelling flesh slugs live inside.
Tenril, it will be your duty to spatter them.
Oh, he's slimy.
I see Tenril has grown no more intelligent in my absence. Enough, Tenril. These disgusting surface creatures are not our main problem.
Except for me, Metlar!
These giant monsters really need to get along.
Yeah. I almost feel bad for Tendril because it seems like he's clearly, he's almost like a pet to the other two. So I kind of wonder, if he had just been raised better, maybe he'd be a good boy. He could be on the good guy's side.
He's like their dog, basically, right?
He's kind of dancing too when Metlar gives him the orders. He's like, all right.
Slimy. I also like, after all the times Chris Latta in G.I. Joe and Transformers plays a underling who's always trying to backstab and move up the ranks as Cobra Commander Starscream. This Decompose is just like when Metlar says something funny, Decompose goes like, meh. Like he likes his boss. And though also, yes, I mean, the way he just goes like, surface-dwelling flesh slug lives inside. That hurt me a lot just now.
Yeah. I don't know what was going on with Chris Latta's throat or his brain perhaps, but only he could summon those noises. We don't, modern voice actors don't do this anymore.
Though also it does help back then, as we heard in the Transformer one too, there's digital effects on the monster voices in these.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You need to start with something horrific and raw, and then you can put some audio effects on it, though.
So Blackthorn is such a jerk. He thinks that as soon as he meets like the most powerful being to ever exist on Earth in Metlar, he's like, well, time to boss him around. Then we meet more of the dorky Granites who are just hiding in the dark, waiting to be found.
What if we were peaceful? Shut up, I'll kill you.
Yeah. When the one guy's like, make buildings, not war, that's when I'm like, oh, boy, they could be a little less direct on their Vietnam War protester allegories here.
Yeah, right now Augur is tweeting a lot about college campuses.
But before that bit, Granite is saying, like, well, they don't trust them because you're friends with this other flesh slug over there who is trying to capture Metlar. This is when Sandra realizes who the guy is in the black suit.
Look, he's captured Metlar. Who is he?
I have a terrible feeling it's my brother, Blackthorn.
Until now, you were only a creature of legend, a story told to children, Metlar. Soon the humans will see the horrible truth behind the legend. Soon they shall bow to me.
No one could bow low enough to be on your level, Blackthorn.
I told you to stay out of my business!
Listen, I don't like to interfere in family quarrels. Stay right where you are.
Are you fool enough to believe you can control the Inhumanoids, Blackthorn?
Decompose! Stifle!
So much noise, so much happening there.
I just love Augur just trying to not do anything whenever he can. Like, well, a little bit of a sibling squabbling. I guess I'll be on my way.
He's like, I don't like to get into family problems here. I'm going to just head home.
Call me when there's something to hit or kill.
Yes. Well, it is funny that he's having all of this speech as he's barely containing one monster and two other monsters are coming straight for him. And also, I mean, Decompose and Tendril should be calling his bluff immediately because he's like, oh, I'm going to destroy Metlar. And they're like, no, he literally can't be destroyed. Like, he can be held in place by magnets, and all they have to do is beat up the guy who is shooting him with magnets. That's all you got to do.
Magnets. Again with the magnets.
Meanwhile, Sandra is just standing there, like, waiting to be grabbed. Like, she's... And also, Sandra does have Smurfette syndrome where all the boys in Earthcore like her, and especially Herc, who's technically supposed to be the leader, but he is the most unmemorable guy in the whole group. Like, he's nothing to me.
Yeah, I never got his name, actually.
Yeah, if I didn't have the cast list in front of me.
He's the green guy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he just has nothing about him. He's just too average to remember.
He's got a grappling hook. That's his...
Yeah, that's the worst accessory. Okay, maybe Dr. Bright's, because his is just claws that don't even seem to do anything either.
At least the claws can, like, cut something, you know. And so Metlar is freed in moments. Like, Blackthorn holds him in place at like a minute tops, instantly gets attacked, and Metlar is freed. But Decompose still gets to work. Now, if I had seen this as a kid, it would have given me nightmares, just like that shipwreck episode of all the fake people in G.I. Joe we watched.
Yeah, this is horrific, but, watching it as an adult for the first time, you can see what they're not allowed to do. Because the way this is communicated, the transformation of Sandra, that's her name, correct?
Yeah.
Into the monster is she's picked up, the claw lightly brushes her cheek, just comes in very slowly, lightly brushes it, and then she's set down and then she transforms. I feel like they wanted like a claw mark or something. They wanted it to be more of a like an infection or more of a scratch or something like that.
Yeah, Decompose's touch, I think also they get away with it because, as it's revealed later, Decompose's powers are not permanent zombification. If you can get in the daylight, it reverses it. So they don't seem to follow other zombie rules of like, touch somebody else and spread or whatever.
It's crazy that she turns not just into a zombie, but a giant woman zombie. This is activating new fetishes left and right.
Oh, God. I'm not sure if the We Hate Movies guys would like this giant woman, but you never know. It takes all kinds.
When she steps on me, her feet will be extra stinky.
So Decompose grabs Sandra, and this is when the voice actress for her, I think she's having a good time in this large bit of screaming here.
Turned her into a nightmare.
It's impossible. Sandra! I never
The word decompose is shouted, I think, 14 times in this episode.
Yes. You know, this is one you would know what to tell your parents to buy you for Christmas when you hear that name. And I mean, I do think Decompose is the coolest design of that. If I was into zombie horror stuff more, he'd be the one I'd want out of the group. I think he's the coolest design.
Yeah, it's not just the dinosaur, it's also part skeleton.
Yeah.
Yeah. And plus you got Chris Latta just screaming, Decompose! Yeah, her transformation, she even has like a crown of like a horn crown. It definitely design-wise, it reminds me of the Black Cauldron. The guys they fight at the end of this feels stolen directly from Black Cauldron.
And I appreciate that Decompose was nice enough to turn her suit into a nice big burlap sack. You got to maintain the modesty.
And spoilers for the next episode, when she shrinks back to normal, it turns into like a pink burlap sack. So that fits her still. The guys are all freaked out. Even Blackthorn feels a little bad about it. They go to commercial break on Screaming Decompose. And just remember that if you watched it in its original form, you had to wait a whole week to see the next segment of this. They then replay the last 10 seconds with more screaming. The Earthcore guys get chased away, and they instantly pull themselves to safety because, you know, they got to get to the new, away from one cliffhanger to the next story. But they still have time to be a little sexist in this, a little clip here.
No two ways about it. She's irritated with us.
Probably the first guys who've ever run away from her.
If she doesn't do something about her looks, he won't be the last.
Woof, woof, right, fellas?
This dame used to be attractive. Now she's a real beast.
We should kill all ugly women.
She has no value to society. God.
She's turned into the greatest monster she possibly could be, an unattractive woman. So, yes, Herc and Augur head off to safety, and then we also get to see as Blackthorn tries to get away, he is cornered and nearly dies. And I'll give Herc and Augur credit here. They work with slightly more logic than most goody-goody kid cartoon heroes of this time would just save the bad guy because it's the right thing to do. But Blackthorn has to convince them.
Car! Save me! Give us one good reason why we should. I possess the secrets of the Inhumanoids! Keep them! Without my knowledge, they'll crush human civilization!
Well, what do you think? Is he worth a grenade? What the heck? 4!
Thanks, suckers!
Now that's gratitude for you.
It's the classic Homer Simpson exit line.
Yes. I love that. It makes logical sense that he's like, well, I have lots of information I'll help you guys with. They're like, but he says, keep them. Like, they call his bluff for just a second. And yes, he instantly turns on them when he gets away. Though, again, I was like, oh, Augur pulls out a grenade. Cool, he's going to throw a grenade at the monster, right? No, he throws it at stalactites that will then drop on the monster. It gets the job done and he escapes. And then Tendril gets to be the screw up in the show. Like, he's the one who gets to fail the most and take all the L's. Metlar, meanwhile, learns that not all flesh slugs are a monolith because some disagree with each other, you know? Yeah, he has to remember that. But okay, now it's time for the political commentary here.
Yeah, the Senate subcommittee is meeting now.
We head to the Granite City where the Granite people are having a political discussion. And before I play the first clip of this, and the whole thing is so funny, I 2 clips from it. But know this, as I learned from the Flint Dilley's book, which made reading it worth it. This first guy, the loser, wimpy guy who wants to capitulate, the character's name is Granahue, and he is a parody of Phil Donahue.
Oh. God. All right. Well,
Yes.
I guess Phil Donahue was considered the liberal talk show host figure. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, and also, it really clicked for me. Listen in this clip here. He's basically talking to an audience the way Donahue would on his show. Give it a little listen here.
The Inhumanoids have left our kingdom. I don't know, but I say we anger them no longer. What do you say, folks?
That's the whippiest thing I've ever heard.
Down, Augur. The granites are only...
Yes, but in the long run, look, the Inhumanoids are going to come back and kick their
I
boldest...
agree with the flesh slug.
Humans! We're called humans!
I stand corrected. Nevertheless, the humans are right. I move that we forge a real peace and stand against the Inhumanoids now. All opposed?
Make buildings, not war!
The majority clearly favors action.
Dear God.
Yes. There's a lot of back there, but the Donahue thing, that's where it clicked for me, where he says, "What do you say, folks?" Like, that's Donahue talking to his audience.
Yeah, I really just love the voice acting on the Phil Donahue Granite Monster. He's like, I don't know. What do you think over there? Like, the choices they made, like, I realize that it's, poking fun at, not just Phil Donahue, but also like, the pacifists and the people who just want to talk about things and not get action done. But the voice actor, just the way he made his voice sound and his mannerisms are just kind of funny for just those couple seconds.
This surprised me, by the way. This episode goes live in about a month after we record it, but Phil Donahue still alive with his lovely wife Marlo Thomas. So there you have it, folks.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Donahue, I thought his show was good for its time because he was like the anti, there were some very extreme guys who had talk shows back then, but he always was like, guys, let's figure this out. Let's talk, and he would actually treat, like, say, a gay person as a human being instead of like a monster.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And it confused me because that main rock guy they talked to sounds a lot like Ed Asner. But as far as I can tell, it is not Ed Asner, is it?
Yeah, I was getting Ed Asner vibes, but I also thought he'd be too big for this now. He moved into voice acting in the 90s, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think Gargoyles was probably his first big voice acting role that he did.
Yeah, that and Spider-Man 94 were the same year. By 86, I think the Lou Grant show is running or almost canceled, thanks to his left-wing political views, which Ed Asner had a lot of good ones.
Rest in peace.
But no, I mean, like you said, Bob, this is such a guy who lived through Vietnam protests complaining about Vietnam protesters.
Yeah, and we can see what Augur really wants to do with these peaceniks.
Yes. It's so one saying like need more buildings, not war. It's like, yeah, how dare you want to invest in infrastructure? What a wimp. Yeah, these were all like the guys. Something context listeners need to know is that like the people who were adults in the 80s that grew up in the 60s and 70s, they were mad that somebody questioned that America ever had a wrong war or did a bad thing. So they spent the 80s trying to bring up the righteousness of action. You have to do something. Like, this is the same drive that, cheers on the brave Mujahideen fighters, which that's not a real thing. It's the brave people of Afghanistan, by the way. But yeah, this is the stuff that happens. I mean, this was context I take from Great Blowback podcast, one that Brendan James on our show before, and he's great. But they talk about how Afghanistan around the same time was viewed as like, oh, finally one where we're not the bad guys. Like, we're going to save the people of Afghanistan from Russians instead of this won't be Vietnam. And, 5 years after this episode airs, that's similar reasoning for Desert Storm and why it became like the cable news thing. A bunch of, boomers get to say, have a good war, or they wanted one.
And Bart Simpson was there supporting it.
But so when you think about the arguments they're having here, one, they're already saying like, don't spend money on war, spend it, on public goods, which is a good idea. And then second, in the next scene, we get to see that even if you do vote for a war, well, the generals might be bitches who don't really go for it.
Which is your department, General Granitary? I will begin making logistical and military plans as soon as the Senate determines our military objectives.
I'll give you your military objectives. You find this Metla character and...
It will not be so simple. He cannot be destroyed, only neutralized by Magna Corps' magnetic field.
And Magna Corps has been captured.
I don't tell me if I'm out of line, but I think we must negotiate with Metlar for his release.
Negotiate? This is how you negotiate!
Enough, Augur, enough!
God, yeah. One of the guys even passes out when Augur puts his non-drill in his face. If you're not watching this, it might sound like he's got a drill. He doesn't. He's got like a stick with an orb at the end that I guess rotates fast enough that it could give you like a skin burn, maybe.
It's enough like a drill as, like, say, the end of an umbrella is a drill, maybe.
But yeah, Senate approval. What is this shit?
Yeah.
Nuke them.
I'll tell you what you got to do. Yeah, he's like, how does this general want the Senate approval? And then he literally says the Senate approval, which again, it's like after Vietnam, these guys were mad that the president couldn't just start a war when he felt like it, which, hey, the augurs of the world should be totally happy by the last like 20 years of American
No, don't worry.
policy.
That came to part very quickly in 2003. We decided, no, it's fine. President can just unilaterally do whatever he wants again. All is right with the world.
Well, though only when it comes to war. If it could help somebody,
oh, right,
you got to
right.
go through the, a lot of different pipelines. Yeah, I also think the Granahue instantly going like, I think we should negotiate. Like, maybe I'm crazy here, but let's negotiate. And just is like, I'll murder you before you negotiate with somebody. I'll kill you.
You should just start crying at this point.
He should be like submissively urinating at Granahue.
Some of my friends are still over there.
Yeah, actually, what Augur is missing is a POW hat, a POW MIA hat. And again, the politics said by Augur, I have to again say, he becomes president in the final episode, just to let you know Flint Dille feels about Augur's views.
It's weird this guy is going to school at UC Berkeley, and these are his political views.
Yeah, it is surprising, but again, he is a rich kid who went there.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe he was just trolling everyone else.
Yeah. Well, and it seems there is almost I wouldn't say a huge environmental stance, but it almost seems like there's a slight one, like, with the redwoods. We'll get to it in a little bit, but yeah, kind of like, I guess they are right. Maybe we shouldn't just indiscriminately cut down every tree we see, but hard to match that with everything else that's here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this guy contains multitudes because we get all of this anti-peace talk, all these very conservative talking points in this very militarized cartoon. And then we get talking trees.
And conservation talk. Like, oh yeah, all of our drilling for oil is what awakened these guys. Like, there definitely is. Oh, and also the bit about privatization and the cutting of budgets of public programs. That tricked me into thinking like, oh, Flint Dille got in some liberal messages into this. But this episode really tears that apart.
The tiny environmental message is the federally mandated thing, like and now we know segments from G.I. Joe. They just work that into the episode proper. Don't cut down some trees, but also go to war.
Always remember how to stop a bloody nose from watching G.I. Joe.
And to not grab a sparking power line in the middle of the road that I come across every day of my life.
Or go swimming in a lightning storm. These things, see, they were there to make it seem like these shows had any, societal value. Sadly, they did teach me lessons that stuck with me. So yes, once all the ripe political metaphor is over, they then actually get together a plan. This is another hilarious bit there where they said like, okay, first we need to repair our vehicles. Then I was like, well, stop right there. You're underground with no electricity or tools. You're repairing the vehicles that fully exploded?
Yeah, I guess that's not even addressed in this episode after that, right?
No, I mean...
Nope, they just have them again.
Yeah, they just have them again.
They're just driving around in them. Though this was some of the most ambitious stuff in the episodes I watched, which they constantly were doing picture-in-picture things. Like, it's almost like a Brian De Palma movie of, like, wipes and stuff. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I was like, what is this, Fargo Season 2? I'm watching Fargo Season 2, by the way.
And apparently it was all done in animation, not in editing, which Flint Dille said caused a lot of the problems for them. Which, again, you ask for something that complicated from your heavily underpaid Japanese producers. I do also think, another thing I forgot to say, another reason why Toei might have spent less, and this has been on my mind lately because it's going in the opposite direction now. 86, I believe, is when the yen and dollar got a little closer in value. So the dollars they were being paid for foreign overseas production didn't go as far in converted to yen as it did the year before. So they're not spending as much on Toei's side. Yeah, they very quickly revealed everything. Then they decide they need to split up. They send Augur and Liquidator together to go on the river. Then Bright goes back up top to talk to the stupid trees. And then meanwhile, Herc is going to go to decompose his lair in an attempt to save Sandra.
Skell web.
With the granite. Skell web. Yeah.
Well, it's not quite a skeleton. It's not quite a web.
And then also talk about my surprise when the next scene becomes a Civil War tour guide.
Yeah.
I was a little too disappointed that the Confederacy lost.
Yeah, this guy's got an agenda. When I was watching this, I feel like we were all supposed to be crying like Dr. Doom on 9/11 when we're watching these Confederate statues get pulled underground.
Yeah.
Ones that were
I did
erected
right.
during civil rights laws passing to taunt people who weren't white.
Yes. So,
Yeah, Tendril can't be all bad. He's just toppling monuments.
So,
built to slave owners.
I'm on Tendril's side here, but yes, here, at the very least, the way this tour guide is played, he has an opinion about who won and who lost the Civil War.
Now, over there is what is known as the high water mark of the Confederacy. Hoping to break the Union lines, Lee ordered Pickett's charge right on this very battlefield. The Yanks stopped him, and the war was pretty much over, save for the shouting.
Is that part of the show?
Oh, that's amazing! Put the pedal to the metal and don't stop till we're in the next county.
And unfortunately, that would mean no more slavery.
Boo. Boo. Yeah.
Them damn Yankees, the war of northern aggression.
Well, I do feel like if you're taking your family on a vacation in the 80s to a Civil War battleground, you want to hear a tour guide who's like, and it's very sad that the Yankees won this day. Like,
yeah, I think you mentioned, Henry, that the Ken Burns Civil War documentary came out when you were a kid in the South, and a lot of people were a little prickly about it.
Yes, I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I think tying into that, for reasons we just talked about, there were a lot of like privately funded museums to Confederate soldier history and all that around there, but it's a cheap way to take kids on tours and schools on tours. So I did see a few of those in my youth. I did not understand the weight of them, but they were definitely presented as, I'll say this, as I remember as a kid, they talked way more about how sad it was that Sherman burned down Atlanta in this Atlanta museum than they ever mentioned the word slaves or slavery. Give you some viewpoint there. No, I mean, back then it was presented as, what a shame for the South. They've been so ashamed ever since. The shame is, of course, losing the Civil War. That is the shame. If you watch the next two parts, these Civil War monuments are being stolen so they can be reanimated to be an army of Civil War soldiers who are made of metal later in the series.
There's more statues coming to life than I would have suspected.
Yes. It's very strange. If they had gotten to do a second wave of Inhumanoids toys, would Robert E. Lee on a horseback, would that have been there?
Kids would be buying them for the entirely wrong reasons, or their parents, I should say.
West Virginia would have been their biggest market.
We already passed. I did want to mention, I thought it was funny when they were talking to the Granite guys about their plan. They did mention, can we de-decompose Sandra, undecompose her? And the guy goes, oh, yeah, but it won't be easy. You have to have the big, bright light that warms the water. And they're like, oh, you mean the sun? like, oh, that doesn't seem that hard at all, actually.
Yeah, they can speak perfect English, yet the word for sun has eluded them.
They never go up there and know what it is. And flesh slugs are just... It is funny, too, that Augur, the most conservative member of the group, he's the one who's just like, stop being racist. Call me a human. And yeah, then there's a very Star Wars-like screen wipe across the screen, too, which, again, I'm impressed when it's not done digitally. This is all in animation by Toei. And then, after a little bit of Confederate-centric history, then as we go into Metlar's dwelling, we get a more dissertation on the collective unconscious.
You know, when you think about it, nearly every ancient culture had some kind of vision about the underworld. Maybe it's part of the collective unconscious. Sure makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I wonder about that all the time.
In In mythology, there was always something guarding the underworld. The Russians thought it was a monster named Surma. The Greeks had a dog named Cerberus.
And you have me, Metlar.
Is he here for the mandatory educational content?
Huh. Now I'm wondering. I think you might be right, Bob. Maybe that's where the Confederacy counts in that, too. It's like, see, kids now know when Pickett's Charge was. They learned about Pickett's Charge. They learned about Cerberus.
A little bit of history, a little bit of psychology.
I do like how Augur goes like, oh, yeah, I'm thinking about that all the time. And then he's just like, shooting stalactites the whole time. I think they even get a little impressively ambitious as Liquidator is talking about all the other things that inspire like history. When he mentions Cerberus, then you see a vision of the three-headed dog in the fire. I was like, wow, that's an impressive move.
It looked kind of neat. And then somehow a 50-foot monster appears out of nowhere without them noticing.
Yes, yeah. They're not very observant guys. They get some rocks thrown at them, and they're about to be covered in lava, which then leads to another cliffhanger. But fortunately, they easily are saved again by Liquid.
They showed unusual courage for weak flesh slugs. In a way, I shall be sorry to see their species obliterated from the planet.
Augur, you still alive?
Yeah, but I don't know how.
I sprayed liquid oxygen. It froze the first wave of lava before it got to us.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there's just one problem. I don't know how we're gonna get out of here.
Oh, great, Liquidator. Just great.
Yeah, when he was explaining this, I was like, yes, that's whatever it is you're talking about for you.
And he seems so annoyed that Liquidator saved his life. He's like, good, now we're just counting down till I die the second time, huh?
Yes, yeah.
And they spend almost all of the next episode inside the little, I don't know, rock capsule, whatever you want to call it, that they created for themselves before they finally get out,
It's more of a coffin, really.
Yes, to know it's so crazy to see it animated too, because it makes so little sense. It's like, yep, I surrounded us with liquid oxygen that instantly turned into rock, or I guess it froze the lava to turn it into rock instantly around them, and then it turned into a safe encasing.
And we won't bother to say why the lava just won't remelt again.
Yes.
No, he hit the first wave of it. It's fine.
I do like Metlar expressing, appreciation for his enemies. He's like, I shall miss them when I've obliterated this flesh slugs. We cut back to Dr. Bright and goes up top to try to talk to trees again. They ignore him at first until he threatens to kill them.
I'm just going to start cutting air like this.
If you happen to get in the way, that's your fault. That's what activates the Redwoods, who very boringly argue with a nerd.
I thought that would bring you around.
The childishness of your species is exceeded only by your lack of patience.
If humans lived 2,000 years, maybe we wouldn't be in a hurry either.
He has a point. Quiet, Ranson. What do you want of us?
We know that Metlar is going to be coming to the surface for energy. Only your people can stop him. Now here's my plan.
See, there you can hear the Les Nessman in his voice.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I guess he wasn't playing, that was a character, as was Bernard, the other voice I'm familiar with, and he has a normal speaking voice.
Yes, yeah.
This Redson toy is the worst Inhumanoids toy. It doesn't even look like a tree.
Yeah. Well, because they're like tree stumps, so you don't even get like hair or anything. No, they're so ugly looking, and also they have no good mouth chart. I feel like they're not just ripoffs of the Ents, which they obviously are, but also they rip off the apple trees from Wizard of Oz, I feel like, in the way they talk. Like, what if I took something off of you? But also them arguing about oh, well, you're so old, apparently it doesn't seem like a long time to you. That's literally what Merry and Pippin are arguing with the Ents about in Two Towers.
Wow. Well, their only attack is to just do this, bring their fist down. They don't have any other special powers except for smashing.
I hesitate Dr. Bright's thought that only they can stop Metlar.
Yes.
Really? I thought we already established that the magnet guy is the only one that can stop Metlar.
Yeah, actually, I don't think things made of wood are very helpful against a guy who spits lava. I feel like they're not going to do much. So yes, then we cut back to the Granite losers being racist towards humans some more. They're having to learn to stop calling them flesh slugs. You can't even call people flesh slugs anymore in this woke society. And then a truly bizarre shot of Tendril basically like running around underground, and then they just cut to him being in like a sewer system going up top. Like, this is like Monster A-Go-Go from Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah, when he's just running around, I'm just like, oh, what's he up to?
Well, it turns out he's going to a place that the Mutors know where he's going to because they're waiting for him later. I really don't understand it.
His plan is to stick like a little tendril up through a manhole and then just get it smashed over and over.
Yes. Yeah, also it is so weird. Them punching these veiny tendrils over and over again just looks weird at a certain point. Also, you should never write a cartoon show where a character says this.
This is getting big boring. Redson, there's a car coming.
Don't tell kids this is boring. They're going to change the channel.
Yeah. Huge mistake in your cartoon, especially during an action sequence.
It feels like I would bet that was dialogue Flint Dille wrote when he's just like, so we're watching a scene where trees stand still and wait for something to happen. Like, it is boring, but my argument would be don't write to that scene then. But I guess he got handed tree toys by Hasbro, and he's got to put them in there somewhere.
Kids love playing with fake trees.
They love it. The trees then start fighting Tendril. This also, Bob, reminded me of Invasion of the Neptune Men, not Prince of Space.
Okay.
One of my favorite MST3K lines ever of like, no matter what they do, they neither decrease or increase the number of enemies they're shooting at.
Okay, so Prince of Space is the one where he's like, your weapons are harmless against me, but Invasion of the Neptune Men has Space Chief in it.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And also the Hitler building that's blown up. They use actual World War II footage.
Actually, when Tendril is throwing these Confederate monuments in the lava, I just thought, they blew up the Hitler building.
And so they just keep punching Tendril a bunch. And also, I mean, Tendril can always grow more. That's actually how the cliffhanger at the end of the movie is. They seemingly have captured them all over again and Tendril is dead. But one snippet of Tendril lives and just regrows for the next episode. So Tendril especially you just can't keep him down. They have an almost joke of like the giant trees run by the night watchman and he's like, did you hear something? And the guy's like, no, I probably just spending too much time in the forest.
Yeah, they have a whole other story going on I kind of want to know about.
What's that guy's deal? But after they beat back Tendril, after a too long fight sequence, we then have technically a joke as the Redwoods are high-fiving each other.
Way to go! I knew he was planted too close to a football stadium.
Weird editing on that dialogue where he says,
yeah,
football stadium.
Like, I even made a note here. Like, I understand they're trying to make a joke. I don't get the joke. Like, is it because they're celebrating and tree people aren't supposed to celebrate like that? And he must have learned it from the football stadium?
I guess it is that they are doing like an end zone celebration for winning this, and that it's embarrassing their elder who's just like, you're acting like a football player or whatever, I guess.
I didn't understand this joke at all.
Yeah.
Well, and it's poorly delivered by a garbled monster man.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Who almost, Redland, the main tree, he almost kind of sounds like Peter Cullen / Optimus Prime, but it's I don't think I saw his name in the credits either, but it's that same, and I think it's, like you said, it probably digitally enhanced to make it a little deeper and slower.
This one, they're like, you know what? Peter Cullen starting to ask for too much money, not getting him. We'll get Chris Latta, and also no Frank Welker. Notice that too. That's a cheap production, doesn't bother hiring Frank Welker. Me and Bob were just talking about an episode of Simpsons where they could have used Frank Welker and cheaped out.
Is that the one where the thing is coming up soon? Santa's little helper doesn't save Homer from the fire, then the cat does, or that he becomes like the Duff
Yep.
mascot. Am I mixing up two different Simpsons episodes here?
Same one. John Cassier. Now that episode went live 2 weeks ago, but if you missed it, that's some trivia for you.
Then we cut to them getting into Decompose's lair, Skellweb, and then it's a stage from Bloodborne is what I thought. That's what I saw.
Yeah, totally. Oh, any Souls game, just this sunken kingdom full of crypts underground.
Yeah.
And I love that some of them are like it almost like it got flipped up on itself because there's towers upside down from the ceiling of the cave as well that are literally just spitting out skeletons.
There's some good background design in here too. And also I had to laugh. I don't feel like it was an intentional joke, but there's like a stained glass building that seemingly is a church. There's, Christian grave markers as well. But then they walk by a King Tut sarcophagus is also there.
They're stained glass, I guess. I assume, depicting the saints and Jesus before they were smashed.
Yeah, but also Decompose not only grabbed down this town, but also grabbed down like an Egyptian town at some point too. There's also a funny little joke about, I dislike the human's choice of building materials. I'll make a note of it. Like, he's like, fuck you.
I'll turn you into an outhouse.
Here's them exploring the decomposed city.
Decompose must have pulled this entire town down from the surface of the earth.
I dislike the human's choice of building materials.
I'll make a note of it.
Help him!
Wait! It might be a trap!
I will say it was slightly shocking to see these sentient rock creatures get just blown apart by skeletons.
Yeah, they are dead. One of the skeleton monster soldier guys, who is half the size of it, slashes one to pieces with a sword. I couldn't believe that. Though also these Grey Knights are such losers. They have to weigh at least 2 tons, and one skeleton trips one of them?
It feels like they're made out of sand at this point.
Yeah. Maybe they get hard as they get older. The younger ones are just soft sand creatures. Then you got to actually be old to be the hard granite guy.
They are such dorks. Who would want to buy these like beige rock dudes as toys?
And didn't they learn nothing from, because the GoBots had rock creatures as well. I forget what they were called. They may have just been called the Rockmen. And like, you didn't learn anything from the fact that kids didn't like transforming rocks. Because again, who wants to play with a rock? It doesn't do anything. I got rocks outside I can play with.
A kid can have rocks anytime they want.
Yeah, it is weird to sell fake rocks to people.
Also, as they walked by the crucifix tombstones, I was thinking this was released first in summer of '86. This would not have been allowed in a 1986 NES video game, these tombstones here.
Oh, yeah. No depictions of Christian imagery.
It would have been edited out just like it was out of like Castlevania and Dragon Quest. The Grey Knights easily fall into a trap, get beat up, sliced to pieces by a ton of these guys. And we get to hear, like, once they were knights, now they're Decompose's minions. And they are scary. Like, if I, as a 4-year-old, flipped to this on the channel, I would have been screaming. I would have been really scared by this in 1986.
Yeah. Way darker than I was expecting. But now as an adult, I appreciate these cool monsters.
They look really cool. They definitely look like a Souls-type enemy as well.
Yeah.
And actually, probably, maybe you're listening to this as you're playing the new Elden Ring DLC.
Oh, that is coming out in June, isn't it?
I say turn us off and appreciate the sound design.
Yeah, it says they're all being chopped up. Things aren't looking so good for our guys as we get to the next cliffhanger.
We fight to the end!
But how do you kill something that's already dead?
I mean, just to think that they got to say on a 1986 cartoon for kids, how do you kill something that's already dead? Like, that's a scary state. That breaks some rules.
Yeah, using kill and dead in the same sentence.
This is when I'm saying they couldn't say this on the Smurfs that was airing at the same time. But don't worry, folks. They get out of it okay. They're able to cure Sandra in the next episode, just to spoil it for you. But yes, then we get to the credits in classics, stills from the episode, ending credits style. And again, I was searching for names, and other than Flint Dille and a couple of the other writers. The only other name I saw that I recognized was Margaret Leish. That was the only one who would go on to be a big, big deal in kids' TV just a few years later. I actually just watched, the Television Academy has a really cool interview with her I hadn't watched before. I pulled it up just to see if maybe she said something about Inhumanoids. She does not. But she did have this funny story I'd never heard before about the first time she met Stan Lee, and who she had a lot of great working relationship with, had nice things to say. But she said when she was introduced to Stan Lee, it was by Joe Barbera. And in Joe Barbera's opinion, Stan Lee was a kook who you shouldn't listen to. Joe Barbera did not like Stan Lee.
Hanna-Barbera had some interesting opinions, the two men.
I mean, maybe he was a little too New York for Joe Barbera.
Uh-oh.
No, I'm kidding. I'm really smearing Joe Barbera here. But yes, apparently, as Margaret Leish put it, Joe Barbera worked with Stan Lee on the Fantastic Four and the Thing Ring, Do Your Thing cartoon, and he was very annoyed working with Stan Lee on those, apparently. And so maybe that's why he wanted to instead work on the Super Friends with it. Also, I wonder what he thought of, Hanna-Barbera did employ Jack Kirby on a lot of cartoons too, so maybe he just liked Jack Kirby more. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. You just heard the horror stories from Jack about Stan Lee and just kind of internalized it all. He'll steal your stuff and claim it's his. Don't go near him.
You think Joe Barbera would want to side with management guy like Stan Lee?
That's true. He's like, that's some good ideas. Steal the artist's work, eh?
I should have been ripping you off worse, Jack Kirby, when you're designing my Super Friends cartoon. Jack Kirby did the designs on the final season of Super Friends that brought in Darkseid and his other new god characters. Just in case people are like, you're thinking of Alex Toth. They both worked on it, Alex Toth and Jack Kirby. But anyway, that interview with Margaret Leish is pretty fun because she talks about how once she got hired at Fox Kids, she just told Stan Lee, like, hey, now they hired me at Fox Kids, I'm going to make that X-Men cartoon and Power Rangers thing you were always wanting to make. I think it's a good idea. So it was her plan the whole time, and it worked. Nice. But anyway, yes, the Humanoids ends with more screaming, and it's just to be continued in the Hasbro logo. Yep.
Simply wasn't enough.
More screams per minute than any other show on TV at the time.
Chris Latta's voice was in shambles at the end of it. Yeah, no, I mean, what a weird cartoon. Like, it is made on such a strained budget, like, and Toei is not giving it their best. And it's also like a bunch of like jerks arguing with each other the whole time, and the toys suck. But there's something compelling and weird about this thing. Like, it's so weird compared to the other Sunbow Marvel production things from the same time.
Yeah, when I sat down with this for the first time, I thought, oh, okay, what is this? And I didn't realize I would be as delighted as I was by the end. Not just for so bad it's good reasons. I found it very imaginative, despite how inept the execution was via writing and animation. There are things in here that will surprise you that you're not expecting to see in this kind of toyetic kids cartoon from 1986.
Yeah, it's very interesting that they're able to get away with the kind of things that are in here. We've said it many times, but just, people turning into horrible monsters, which happens even more past these first 5 episodes. There's one later where 2 of the heroes, Kirk and Augur, also get turned into like decomposed monsters, and like 100 teenagers are like zombie creatures.
Man, they go to some weird places with this strange show for a toy line that gets canceled so fast. And you know what? It also was an interesting test for me because, I have all this affection for the Transformers movie and some Transformers shows, but it's a test of like, okay, if you had no childhood nostalgia for a thing, what would you really think about essentially the same production as a Transformers episode? It was an interesting taste test. I liked it more than I thought I would, but also it is like, it's a toy commercial. Well, grading on that curve. There is a lot worse toy commercials from 1986.
So yes, that was Inhumanoids. Thank you again, Andrew, for being on the show and sponsoring this episode and choosing great subject matter. Is there anything you want to shout out? Your online presence? Anything you want to call attention to? Now's your chance to do it.
I don't have a big online presence myself, but on the off chance there are people who live in Vermont or Northern New York who listen to this, follow Johnny Wanzer on Instagram and YouTube. He's a great leftist guy. He just had a nice GoFundMe to keep his channel going. He makes great content, well-researched, and just, I don't know the guy. I just like his content, so I'm just kind of pushing him when I can.
Cool.
And it's all local Vermont and Burlington stuff.
I see. No, that's funny. When this cartoon was being made, Bernard Sanders would have been the Burlington mayor at that time.
I think so, yeah. A good chunk of the 80s it was when he was mayor here, yep.
You could have voted for Bernard Sanders and then gone home to watch Inhumanoids the same day. No, that's a great pick. This was a very fun pick again, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for letting me pick something so weird and outside the norm.
So thanks again to Andrew for being on the show and supporting it. And if you want to be cool like Andrew, and I know you do, head on over to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons and sign up for $5 a month. And the second you sign up, you'll access 7 years worth of full-length podcasts, over 150 to date, covering things like Futurama, King of the Hill, The Critic, Mission Hill, and Batman the Animated Series. And that $5 a month also gets you regular access to both new episodes of Talking Futurama and Talk King of the Hill. That is a ton of podcasts that are waiting for you for just $5 a month at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons, and there is a $10 level too. When you sign up for that, you can access all the $5 stuff, but you also get on top of that 1 mega long podcast a month just for the $10 tier. And Henry, what's going on there?
Bob, you're referring to the What a Cartoon movie podcast, which we have so much fun with every month. Just last week, you would have heard the free preview for it on your feed for the Futurama movie Bender's Big Score. We finally covered that as we go through the history of Futurama. Last month, before that, we covered Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 1990 live-action movie, which if you loved this toy talk, I think you'll love us hearing that one. And this month, we begin our summer of Disney Renaissance once more, where we are going to be covering Mulan to start things off. Yes, Mulan, one of my underrated favorites from that era. And we have so many great ones in our back catalog as well of over 5 years of What a Cartoon movies. Us talking for 4, 5, 6 hours even about so many different things. Disney, Pixar, Warner Brothers, anime, Ghibli, so many cool things, including our longest podcast ever, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, 6.5 hours. And of course, if you loved all of this talk about this era of Hasbro cartoons, you simply must listen to our one for Transformers the movie, which digs into so much of this history. So please check out everything you're missing out on patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons.
So I've been one of your hosts, Bob Mackey. You can find me on Twitter as Bob Servo and also on Blue Sky as Bob Servo. And my other podcast, by the way, is Retronauts. It's a classic gaming podcast all about old video games. You can find that wherever you find podcasts or go to patreon.com/Retronauts and sign up there for 2 full-length bonus episodes every month. And Henry, what about you?
I've been Henry Gilbert, and you can find me on Twitter at HENEREYG, also under that on Blue Sky, and Talking Henry on Instagram. And if you're following me and Bob on social medias, then you gotta follow the official Twitter account of this podcast network, which is at Talk Simpsons Pod. It's that on Twitter. It's that on Blue Sky. It's that on Instagram. And if you need to stay in the loop about all the cool stuff we're doing, you gotta follow those. Also, if you want an easy-to-explore list of all of our previously released free podcasts, head on over to TalkingSimpsons.com.
Thanks so much for listening, folks. We'll see you again next time for an extended free preview of this month's episode of What a Cartoon Movie, all about Mulan, and we'll see you then.
Let's beat fate!
At the UPS Store, we know things can get busy this upcoming holiday. You can count on us to be open and ready to help with any packing and shipping or anything else you might need.
Is there anything you can't do?
Actually, I don't have a good singing voice. The UPS... Nope. But our certified packing experts can pack and ship just about anything.
At least that's good.
The UPS Store. Be unstoppable. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. Come in today to get your holiday goodies there on time.
Ever tried reading while jogging, cooking, or even juggling flaming torches? Yeah, it doesn't end well. But with audiobooks.com, you can conquer books without the circus act. Dive into over 450,000 titles, including more than 10,000 free ones. Get hooked on a bestseller, find your next obsession, or finally read that classic you've been avoiding since high school. And here's the inside scoop. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial and snag your first 3 audiobooks on the house. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.